Chapter 137. Yin-Yang chuckled humorlessly. This person's feat is far from this. This person has charged into the Golden Palace many times back then, meeting the Emperor directly for the wronged officials and vouching for them with his life. He's been extremely supportive towards his disciples as well, fulfilling all their requests. He can be said to be a model scholar, a sage. If anything were to happen to him, there would be countless scholars willing to die for him. There would also be countless high-ranking officials who would stand up for him, unwavering in their determination. Yin-Yang said, "That's why I said that this person is a loyal and righteous man. Add to that the fact that he's popular and highly respected. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he's a living sage." Ling Xiaozui scratched his head, not knowing what to say for a moment. "This person's name is Enchanting." Yin-Yang said, "I wonder if Elder Ling has heard of this name before." The expression on Ling Xiaozui's face turned strange. The shock had disappeared, but what replaced it was an inexplicable expression. "So it's him." Yin-Yang said, "So Elder Ling knows his name too?" Ling Xiaozui chuckled humorlessly and enunciated each word clearly. "Not only do I know him, he's Supreme Lord Springfrost." Once the last 4 words left his mouth, Yin-Yang felt his body tremble violently. Yin-Yang could only feel a violent shudder run through his body. For a moment it was as if thunder had rumbled in his mind, causing his eardrums to buzz. He had only asked casually. His original intention was to test if Ling Xiaozui had heard of this person's name. He had never expected Ling Xiaozui to give him an answer that caught him off guard. With Ling Xiaozui's reputation and status, he would never lie or say anything wrong. Perhaps, for Ling Xiaozui to be so certain, he must have been certain of this and had even crossed paths with this person before. However, a great scholar of his generation. An old official of 3 dynasties. The ancestor of scholars. A loyal and righteous man. Such a person, who was like a sage in this world, was actually full of evil, devoid of conscience, perverse, cruel, merciless, and deranged. Supreme Lord Springfrost. Thinking back to the 4 Seasons Tower's people whom he had met in the past, Supreme Lord Springfrost would die immediately once he spoke of him. It would be an eerie and horrifying death where his soul would be destroyed and his body turned into a mummy. Then, she thought of the benevolent, senile, and righteous Enchanting. If nothing went wrong, his name would definitely be recorded in the annals of history, and his name would go down in history. Yin-Yang could not help but shudder at the thought of it. Back when I was dealing with the 4 Seasons Tower, I had encountered this Enchanting. Yes, Supreme Lord Springfrost. Almost all the plots and traps against me were his handiwork. In the end, he even joined forces with another Supreme Lord to annihilate me. Ling Xiaozui heaved a long sigh. I mentioned that 2 of the 4 Supreme Lords were severely injured by me in the battle just now. One of them is Supreme Lord Springfrost. Enchanting, with your current shallow cultivation base, of course, you won't be able to recognize him. If the 2 of you had crossed paths before, I'd really wonder how you managed to escape from him. You're really too lucky. Yin-Yang's hair stood on end as he listened. This Enchanting, Elder He, was actually a formidable presence who could exchange blows with Ling Xiaozui. He had even managed to escape when Ling Xiaozui's murderous intent was at its peak after an intense battle. He had only paid the price of being severely injured. Elder Ling is known as the unrivaled expert. Could it be? Yin-Yang asked carefully. Don't mention the title of unrivaled expert in front of me. The bitter smile on Ling Xiaozui's face was genuine this time. How can I be the unrivaled expert with my insignificant abilities? Has there ever been an unrivaled expert in this world? Ling Xiaozui said solemnly, if there is, the unrivaled expert must have been framed by his enemy. Yin-Yang coughed and scratched his head. However, he was inwardly shaken. Ling Xiaozui had said, this is my insignificant ability. Insignificant? At Ling Xiaozui's level, he would not use such a tone to be humble. There was no need to. Then, what did this mean? When I went against the 4 Seasons Tower head-on, I was at most a martial artist with some reputation in the martial world. However, after a few decades of pursuit, I was suddenly crowned as the unrivaled expert of the world. Ling Xiaozui's smile was bitter. Even that poem was written by the Four Seasons Tower's Mr. Nian. The more Yun Yang thought about it, the more horrified he felt. A chill ran down his spine. The divine dragon soars in the mortal realm, a pot and a sword soar to the heavens. There are countless people in the 4 seas and 8 wastelands, the world's heroes are supreme. Such a resounding poem was actually used to frame people? Is it really good to be famous? Since then, the challenges, attacks, traps, and ambushes I encountered were even more than what the Four Seasons Tower had purposely arranged. This is the price of being famous. A person may not be willing to bear it, but he has to. Ling Xiaozui chuckled bitterly. The grudge has been settled, but this title can't be taken down. I can only be the martial world's target for the rest of my life. Yun Yang nodded quietly. The Four Seasons Tower's move was indeed vicious, killing without spilling blood. If Ling Xiaozui's title as the world's unrivaled expert could not be taken off, the turmoil caused by this title would never cease in the long run. The ultimate outcome would still be buried under these 6 words. Beheading the unrivaled expert, Ling Xiaozui. What kind of title was this? Who in the martial world would not want it? Yin Yang thought about it and said, if that's the case, this He Hanqing isn't a man with lofty ideals, nor is he a loyal and righteous man. He's just fishing for fame, an ambitious man who paves the way for the Four Seasons Tower. Ling Xiaozui frowned and said, that may not be the case. He has done a lot of good things for the Empire of Yutong. Although his motive may not be for the Empire of Yutong, it's more to balance the continent's situation, the benefits are real. Yin Yang said indifferently, his merits have never been in my eyes. I only know that he's Supreme Lord Springfrost. His lingering blood curse of speech has caused all his subordinates to lose their lives immediately as soon as they utter the word Supreme Lord Springfrost. Just this alone is enough for him to die 1,000 times. Even if he were to die 1,000 times, he would not be forgiven. Lingering blood curse of speech? Ling Xiaozui sat up straight, his expression serious. Has he really cultivated the lingering blood curse of speech? That's right. Yin Yang thought about it and said, I've previously confirmed and imprisoned a few Four Seasons Tower's men. However, once they uttered the word Supreme Lord Springfrost, smoke would rise from their bodies immediately, their flesh and blood would dry up. Even their bones would turn into dust. They died a horrible death. This is the terror of the lingering blood curse of speech. Those who violate the blood curse will have their souls dispersed and their spirits destroyed. Ling Xiaozui's expression was grim. Recently, the Empire of Yutong's veterans who had retired and returned home due to their physical disabilities have been disappearing continuously. 9 of them have gone missing at once, Yun Yang said faintly. Besides, the relationship between these 9 people must be very good. Ling Xiaozui felt his blood rush to his head. As the top expert of the martial world, a martial arts master of his generation, Ling Xiaozui naturally knew of such a wicked method of searching for people. The spectral path of the soul, the abyss path of flesh. Just the thought of such a wicked method filled him with rage. There's such a thing? Yes. It's because of this that I met He Hanqing by chance. However, I didn't know that he was the Supreme Lord Springfrost that I'd been searching for. Yin Yang sucked in a deep breath. It's good that the two are one. This Supreme Lord Springfrost's ability is unfathomable. Looking at the entire empire of Yutong, no one can stop him now. Ling Xiaozui hesitated for a moment. A murderous aura rose from him, but it disappeared immediately. He said in distress, but, my promise. Looking at Ling Xiaozui's dilemma, Yun Yang suddenly had a strange feeling about this world's unrivaled expert. Such a person valued keeping his promise more than his own life. Although he was rather pedantic, he had to admit that he was a very adorable person. Besides, Yun Yang also felt that it was because of this unyielding temperament that this person had reached his current martial realm. If he had given up on his beliefs and promises, he would not be so frightening, nor would he be so adorable. Yin Yang thought about it and said, actually, even if Elder Ling had really attacked, it wouldn't have broken his promise because the Four Seasons Tower had attacked you first. Attacked me first? Ling Xiaozui was stunned. Why didn't I feel it? Yin Yang rolled his eyes and said, they were attacking someone Elder Ling cares for. Isn't that a violation of the original promise? Ling Xiaozui was still puzzled, but he did not interrupt this time, waiting for Yin Yang to continue. Yin Yang did not dally, telling him about the Four Seasons Tower's actions against Cirrus House and the forced marriage of Yun Zuyu. Of course, Yin Yang had tried his best to be objective when he was narrating, but he had still added in a lot of exaggeration. They knew that Cirrus House was under your protection, but the Four Seasons Tower still did it. Didn't they attack you first? Seeing that Ling Xiaozui was still hesitant, Yin Yang continued, besides, I'm not asking you to kill this Supreme Lord Springfrost. As long as you beat him up, it doesn't matter if he's severely injured or on his last breath. As long as he doesn't die in your hands, it'll be acceptable no matter what you say, right? Ling Xiaozui's eyes shone as he clapped his hands. That's right, this is a great idea. Lao Mei and Feng Mafei, who were standing aside, were dumbfounded. How could this work? Both of them had the same feeling. How could this world's unrivaled expert be so easily fooled? Once the plan was decided, Ling Xiaozui and Yin Yang began toasting and drinking to relieve their boredom, truly satisfying their alcohol cravings. The feast lasted until midnight. It was only when Ling Xiaozui was sent to the guest room to rest that Lao Mei asked cautiously. Young master, you wouldn't have met a fake one, would you? How could this fellow be so easily fooled? Yin Yang chuckled meaningfully. Easy to fool? Why don't you go try? With a laugh, he returned to his room. Ling Xiaozui was easily fooled? How could this be possible? The reason that experienced martial artists like Lao Mei and Feng Mafei would have such an illusion was mainly because Ling Xiaozui had already decided to help him from the beginning. First, the lost wager. Second, the kindness of the three Kirin fish willingly spitting out the essence of divine water. He had only wanted him to think of a way to give him a reason to attack in a roundabout manner. Of course, when it was confirmed that the target was the Four Seasons Tower's Supreme Lord Springfrost, Ling Xiaozui no longer had any doubts about this vengeful target. All his inventory had been released at once. He had been writing from afternoon to night. He had wanted to gather 10 chapters, but he did not manage to write that many after all. Still, it was good enough that he had 9 chapters now. A long, long time, 134 chapters, a lifetime. Haha. Tomorrow's update on the 2nd will be at noon and afternoon. Seeking subscriptions, seeking monthly votes. Feng Family's Return Battle. Chapter 138. I am the Supreme One. My motive for releasing the book on the 1st of June was very simple. I thought that we all have a dream in our hearts, a childhood dream. Perhaps, this dream can only exist forever but cannot be realized. However, the novel has provided us with such a fantasy paradise. We want to fulfill our dreams in the world of the novel. From the beginning to the end, I really did not feel how old I was. My childish heart was beating rapidly. I am actually a rather sensitive person. My threshold for humor is very low. Sometimes, when someone farted and I heard it, I would laugh for a long time, a joke. When others were watching it expressionlessly, I could not stop laughing until others looked at me strangely. Speaking of which, it was a little awkward. Similar to my threshold for humor, my threshold for tears was very low as well. I was easily moved. My wife was watching a drama. I was someone who never watched dramas, but after watching it for a dozen minutes, I saw a tragic scene. My tears fell. Then, the couple looked at each other with tears in their eyes. After that, I would always be laughed at. Ah, you actually cried too. At that time, I was too ashamed to show my face. A grown man. Cough, cough. Really. In short, my inner emotions have become richer. Hee, these are definitely my weaknesses in daily life or work. But for a job like writing a novel, it seems to be quite suitable. Haha. The book will be released on the 1st of June and the 1st of August. As a retired soldier, I have considered the timing of the book's release. To a certain extent, the Yun Yang I'm writing about can be considered a soldier. Therefore, I thought that on the 1st of August, it would be a holiday for myself and Yun Yang. The 1st of August is a military holiday. It is a holiday for all the nation's soldiers. Of course, I thought that it would also be Yun Yang's holiday, the Nine Supremes' holiday. Tai Zheng, the holiday of millions of soldiers. Let us celebrate it for them. Therefore, I chose to release it on the 1st of August. Of course, tonight is our annual gathering of comrades. My new book is released. With my overflowing vanity, of course, I want to show off in front of my comrades. I hope that everyone can let me have some pride in front of my comrades. Feng Ling's pride will depend on everyone. Back to the main topic, the next segment was, of course, asking for monthly votes. I was actually very excited on this day. After experiencing so many books being released, I was still very excited today. It has been 3 years since we last saw this battlefield. The fierce battle of Proud World was still vivid in his mind. But in these 3 years, we were just spectators. The Heaven Domain is equivalent to me resting for a book's worth of time. Even when the firmament of the Sky Domain erupted with 10 updates, I rarely asked for monthly votes. Because, to be honest, I feel that I am not very satisfied with the book I wrote. However, I've basically poured all my blood, sweat, and tears into this book. I feel that I've written this book, I'm the Supreme Being, to date, I've reached my peak. Whether it was the investment, the plot, or the characters. So, our Feng clan needs monthly votes again. Do you still remember? Back then, as long as we moved, the entire Qidian would tremble. That's right, we lost more than we won back then, but which of our battles wasn't soul-stirring? Back then, when did we not fight crazily? Back then, which of our battles didn't last until the very last moment? When had the Feng clan ever been afraid? Proud of the world to conquer the world. Now, we have returned to this battlefield. The battlefield was still there. The will to fight was still there. Our brothers are still here. Feng Ling was still there. The Feng family was still here. The battle was still here. The disciples of the Feng family, fight the martial world again. Millions of brothers, fight with me. Monthly votes. This will be the best gift I've ever received for the first day. It will also be the best gift that Yun Yang, Tai Zheng, and the other Yutang soldiers will ever receive. That was because it represented their acknowledgement. Asking for monthly votes. I am Feng Ling the world. Opening the path with the explosion of 9 chapters. Opening the stage for the Supreme Being. Come. Chapter 139. It was early in the morning. A troop of men had arrived at the residence of Yun's gate. They were the 4th prince's men. The 4th prince had sent out quite a number of men this time. 500 imperial guards in bright armor had arrived and blocked the residence of Yun's gate with great fanfare. The people who returned in defeat yesterday were at the very front. Although they looked menacing, they did not dare barge in directly. They only waited outside the gate. However, his attitude was clear. He wouldn't give up until he reached his goal. Many people who passed by hastened their footsteps in unison, afraid that they would get into trouble. Those who were more daring only took a quick glance before running away as well. It looked like the residence of Marquis Yun was in deep trouble this time. At this moment, a few irritated voices rang out. Make way, make way. What's going on with this big group of people? What are they doing? Lining up for training so early in the morning? Make way, don't block my way. Even good dogs don't block the way. Am I wrong to say that you are blocking the way? Aren't you all blocking the gate? Why are you glaring at me? Do you believe that I won't? Boss, I'm Dong Tianlong, I'm here to visit you. Boss, I'm Chiu Yun-san. I'm here to share weal and woe with you, to share honor and disgrace, to share fortune and misfortune, boss. The 4 young masters swung their arms and barged their way through the 500 imperial guards to the residence of Yun's gate. The 4 of them were cursing, but their faces were calm, as if they did not care at all. Even if something serious were to happen, could it be that we can't handle it even with so many of us together? Unless the sky was falling. Lao Mei opened the door and looked at the 500 troops outside. He was equally calm, as if he did not see anything as he welcomed the guests warmly. Oh, the 4 young masters are here? Please come in, my young master is not up yet, he drank too much last night. Dong Tianlong was curious. Drank too much? Who did he drink with? Who's so amazing? You actually managed to get boss drunk. You must have taken advantage of him while he was still recovering from his illness. What a despicable person. That's right, that's right. Call him out. We have to avenge our boss. Chiu Yun-san rubbed his palms together. How dare he make our boss so drunk that he can't even get out of bed. I'll take him down myself. Let me do it. Xia Bingchuan said sarcastically, Chiu Yun-san, don't get tricked again after drinking too much. We brothers have to clean up your mess. Motherf *Ker, the promised luminary paste still hasn't been delivered. How many days has it been? What happened to the trust between people? Where are the people now? He must have learned something from toying with Chiu Yun-san. Chun Wanfeng added, I'm glad that thing didn't come. If it did, Chiu Yun-san might be toyed with. I'm ashamed to be associated with him. Chiu Yun-san was so angry that his face turned green. Can't you guys get over this? If anyone says another word, I'll cut ties with them. Are you 3 hedonistic playboys addicted to making fun of other people's scars every day? See if I don't uncover your ugly faces in front of boss. The 4 of them entered in a row, arguing noisily. Outside, the 4th prince's men were enraged. Did they not see the menacing presence of the soldiers here? What are you guys up to by having so much fun? Butler May. The middle-aged man who was leading the team said sternly, Please report, Butler. We are under orders to capture the fugitive. Please open the door, young Master Yun. Do not delay us from capturing the criminal. Fugitive. These 2 words caused the 4 young masters to tremble. Boss was hiding a fugitive here? What kind of development was this? Lao Mei said, I will report this matter to the young master. Everyone, please remain calm. With a loud clap, the door was shut again. The people outside could do nothing but continue to wait patiently. The residence of Marquis Yun was different from other marquises' residences. The residence of Marquis Yun had the Shangfang sword guarding the residence. If one trespassed and was killed, it would be a waste of time. There was no justice to be sought. In spite of this, they had to do it. Boss, aren't you awake now? You look energetic. Dong Tianlong came over in a friendly manner. Are you feeling better? Boss, this bastard Dong Tianlong really doesn't know how to talk. He doesn't even know how to get close to us. Boss is not only energetic, you're obviously in high spirits and full of energy, as if you've just played with 3 young ladies. Xia Bingchuan said. You only know about young ladies. Get lost. Boss, you're getting more and more handsome. Sometimes, when I stand with boss, I feel that it's better if I'm a girl. That way, I can be boss's concubine, so that I don't have to see but can't touch. Chiu Yun-san said. Boss is the best. Chun Wanfeng said. Yin Yang's face paled as he listened, not the least bit in high spirits. The few of you, wait a moment. As he spoke, he turned to Ling Xiaozui, who was slowly practicing his martial arts. Brother Ling, there are people here to capture the fugitive. You, the fugitive, better go and deal with it quickly. Ling Xiaozui was exasperated. You're the fugitive. Your whole family is fugitive. However, this 4th prince, seems to be a little too persistent, isn't he? No matter how genuine Ling Xiaozui was, or how good his temper was, he was provoked. Dong Tianlong and the other 3 young masters were stunned. The person was in your home, he should be under your protection. Why didn't you say anything about solving the problem? You actually let the fugitive handle it himself? Dong Tianlong's eyes darted around as he said casually, friend, why don't I help you? Ling Xiaozui was still fuming, so he replied faintly, don't worry about it. He then turned and walked towards the door. The 4 noble young masters were all displeased. Dong Tianlong pursed his lips and said, Boss, who is this? Why is he so arrogant? Chun Wanfeng replied, looks like he's rather arrogant. He thinks highly of himself. Xia Bingchuan replied, Tisk, interesting. Qiu Yunsan said, I think this fellow doesn't know the dangers of the world. He needs to be taught a lesson. Yin Yang coughed twice and ignored them, saying, Come. Have some tea, have some tea. The 4 fellows wanted to find out about Ling Xiaozui's background. No matter how out of line their attitudes were, Yin Yang could still see through their true intentions. However, what Yin Yang hated the most was playing such tricks in front of him. If you had asked me directly, I might have told you the truth. However, the 4 noble young masters digging their own graves and waiting for Yin Yang to bury them was something that Yin Yang did not like. If it had been before, Yin Yang would have liked it. However, after being severely injured and being treated by the 4 noble young masters at all costs, Yin Yang no longer liked this method. I'm not going to explain here. At this moment, a commotion came from the door. Then, Ling Xiaozui, who had gone out, seemed to say something. Then, the other party seemed to be relentless. Thus, an oppressive aura erupted abruptly. Ling Xiaozui had only said one sentence to the leading military officer through telepathy. The military officer was dumbstruck. Then, Ling Xiaozui turned and walked back without another word. Behind him, a few people wanted to rush forward to apprehend the wanted criminal, but the leading military officer suddenly charged forward like a madman, slapping the few fellows to the ground and issuing a series of orders. Retreat! Retreat! Retreat quickly! Quick! Quick! Retreat! You're still shouting, I'll let you shout, I'll let you shout, I'll let you shout. As he spoke, he whipped his assistant half to death as if he had gone mad. When the entire army retreated, this officer took the lead, as if there were a mountain full of tigers chasing after him. He almost pissed his pants and ran back. It was said that the military officer was still terrified when he returned to the 4th prince's residence. Sweat poured uncontrollably from his forehead. The group of people who had left valiantly and returned in a daze were, of course, confused and dissatisfied. Only this military officer was pale, refusing to say a word. Until he saw the 4th prince himself. Where's the 7-scaled fairy that I asked you to retrieve? Why? The 4th prince's expression was filled with surprise. Everyone's gaze fell on the military officer, their meaning clear. Ask him. How would we know what's going on? The officer was still trembling uncontrollably from head to toe. He moved closer to the 4th prince and whispered something into his ear. His voice was so soft that no one could hear what he had said. Then, everyone saw that the 4th prince, who had initially been flushed with pride and looked like he was about to rule the world, actually fell to the ground after hearing the words. His face, which was originally red, instantly turned pale. His eyes were filled with fear. Even his hands and feet were trembling, and his body was shaking like a leaf. The middle-aged man, who was the 4th prince's uncle, came forward to complain, Your Highness, what's going on? This 7-scaled fairy is related to... Related my *SS. The 4th prince suddenly exploded. He jumped up and gave his uncle a good beating. Do you know how much trouble you've caused this time? I'm dead because of you. After a long time, the 4th prince let go of his uncle, who had been beaten to a bloody pulp by him, and muttered in a daze, Now, what should I do? He had completely lost his mind. Thinking of how he had labeled Ling Xiaozui as a fugitive and had even sent men to capture him, the fourth prince felt as if the sky had darkened. How could he have done such a ridiculous thing? Ling Xiaozui was a fugitive? If word of this got out, his reputation as a prince would be forever tarnished. He would forever be the laughing stock of the world. Your Highness. The leading general took a step forward and said in a low voice, "For now, this apology is a must. Otherwise, there will be no end of trouble." The fourth prince looked panicked as he said weakly, "What should we do?" Before Dong Tianlong and the rest could drink a cup of tea, they saw that the fugitive returned from the door. Settled? Yin Yang asked, his tone casual. The other party was only the fourth prince's 500 imperial guards. What trouble could such a small number cause to Ling Xiaozui? Therefore, he was not worried at all. Settled. Ling Xiaozui was indifferent as well. There was a hint of helplessness and exasperation between his brows. This was the first time he had come across such a ridiculous situation. "Have some tea, please." Yin Yang chuckled. "It's a rare gathering with Brother Ling. I don't know if today's encounter can be repeated in the future. We must enjoy ourselves these few days." Chapter 140. Ling Xiaozui chuckled and said, "Child, if you don't die and can break out of the snare of heaven and earth, I believe we'll meet again one day." Yin Yang nodded. "Thank you for your auspicious words. I owe you a favor." Yin Yang knew it very well. Ling Xiaozui had truly done him a great favor this time. After today, the fact that Ling Xiaozui had been a guest at the residence of Yun and had a pleasant conversation with him would definitely be spread far and wide. By then, it would be akin to adding a protective talisman to his body. There were pros and cons to this, but at least in the short term, as long as his true identity was not exposed, the pros would outweigh the cons. After today's incident, Ling Xiaozui would definitely leave immediately. Once he walked out of the residence of Yun, it would be harder than ascending to heaven to meet him again. Qiu Yunsan hummed and rolled his eyes. The more he looked at the old man, the more he disliked him. With a slanted gaze, he asked, "This is Brother Ling, is it? May I ask for your name?" Dong Tianlong, Chun Wanfeng, and Xia Bingchuan glanced over as well. This naive-looking fellow did not seem to be young anymore. Had he lived too long to be an idiot? How could he be so pretentious? Who would not be respectful when they see the young masters of the four noble families coming out? Even if they had something on their minds, they should at least maintain a polite attitude on their faces. Even if it was Keeper Me from the palace who held power in the imperial court, did he not still have to be polite and not act rashly? Although the luminary paste had yet to be delivered, but where did this guy come from? His attitude towards us was neither servile nor overbearing. Instead, he completely disregarded us. This attitude was simply intolerable. Even if the uncle could tolerate it, the aunt could not tolerate it. Seeing that Ling Xiaozui and Yin Yang were about to bid farewell, he could not help but speak up. Ling Xiaozui lifted his head to look at Qiu Yunsan and the other three men, glancing at Yin Yang discreetly. Yin Yang lowered his head to sip his tea, pretending not to notice. Ling Xiaozui smiled faintly. "This young master is..." Qiu Yunsan raised his head and said, "I am from the Qiu family, Qiu Yunsan. Old sir must have never heard of me." Dong Tianlong stretched his neck. "This lord is called Dong Tianlong. Have you heard of this lord, Grandpa?" Ling Xiaozui's gaze lingered on Dong Tianlong's face. "Xia Bingchuan, I am Xia Bingchuan, a member of the Xia clan. A small clan, not worth mentioning, hee. I'm from the Chun family, Chun Wanfeng." Chun Wanfeng smiled reservedly. "I'm just an insignificant nobody. Hee. The smiles of the four young masters were very fake. There's a reason why we're polite to Yun Yang and even verbally acknowledge him as our superior. It's not something that an old man like you can belittle." Ling Xiaozui had even said, "I really didn't know that the four noble families of Spring, summer, autumn, and winter would have such outstanding young talents after so many years. Their courage is commendable. I must pay them a visit in a few days' time, lest we offend the 4 noble families and disaster befalls us." The 4 noble young masters felt their hearts turn cold after listening to his words. If their families knew that they had offended Ling Xiaozui on behalf of their families, if Ling Xiaozui came knocking on their doors, this was truly an imminent disaster, and it was unavoidable. The family leader would probably come out personally to capture them and leave them to dry in the wind, hoping that they would be lucky enough not to implicate the family. The 4 of them were like 4 obedient kittens, standing respectfully as they served the young master. Each of them had a teapot in hand, pouring tea and refilling water, afraid that they would fall behind. They were extremely attentive. "Brother Ling, forget it." Yun Yang tried to smooth things over. "These are my young brothers. They're young and full of vigor. Who hasn't been reckless in their youth? Besides, it's not a crime to be ignorant." Ling Xiaozui said faintly, "I don't blame them. It's just that it wasn't easy for those old friends of mine to make a name for themselves. It's been an arduous task for them to build up their family to where they are now after a lifetime of hard work. Popinjays like them will one day bring real disaster upon themselves. This reminder is still necessary. I'm doing this out of kindness." He smiled faintly. At the end of the day, spring, summer, autumn, and winter also had a past with me. The 4 of them looked even more ashen. It seemed that Ling Xiaozui and the 4 old forefathers were more than just old acquaintances. Were they old friends or even old friends? Yin Yang said, "How about this? Brother Ling, you're a man of leisure. You don't have to worry about this. When I'm free, I'll make the trip on your behalf and it'll be over." Ling Xiaozui hesitated and said, The 4 of them felt their hearts skip a beat as they looked at Yun Yang expectantly. "Save us, big brother, take it as giving this young brother some face." Yun Yang smiled calmly. "Look at you, I've taken care of your food, lodging, and entertainment when you come here. You should at least be able to ask for this from Brother Ling." Ling Xiaozui snorted and said, "Forget it." Yin Yang's expression darkened as he turned to face the 4 of them. "Aren't you going to serve tea and apologize?" As the 4 of them were about to step forward, they heard Ling Xiaozui say, "This old man isn't so narrow-minded. What's there to apologize for? Now that we've had our fill, coming to Tiantang this time and getting to know this young brother is truly a fortuitous encounter in life. I still have matters to attend to, so it's inconvenient for me to stay here any longer. I bid you farewell now. We shall meet again in the martial world." Without waiting for Yun Yang to speak, Ling Xiaozui's motionless silhouette vanished completely with a gust of wind. There was no trace of him left. He had vanished without a trace. Even when Ling Xiaozui's silhouette had vanished, the 4 noble young masters still looked humble and respectful, as if they were looking at a great mountain. After a long, long time, Chun Wanfeng of the 4 noble young masters was the first to fall to the ground. Like a domino effect, the other 3 young masters followed suit. All 4 of them were drenched in cold sweat, their faces pale. It was not that they did not want to hold on, but their legs were as limp as noodles. The 4 of them had similar physiques and similar cultivation base levels. Even the pressure they were under was the same. When the first one's legs could no longer take it, it was a natural chain reaction that affected the other 3. "Mother," the 4 of them cried out in unison as they regained their clarity of mind. What had happened just now had frightened them to death. The world's first heaven medallion had been smashed by the 4 of them. They had brought trouble upon themselves and brought trouble upon themselves. They had dug their own graves. If it were not for their boss, they might have died here today. Even if Ling Xiaozui did not teach them a lesson right in front of their faces, as long as he expressed the slightest bit of dissatisfaction towards them and let their families know about it, the 4 of them would still be killed to apologize to the great legend Ling, to beg for forgiveness and mercy. Thinking of this, the 4 of them fixed their grateful gazes on Yun Yang, each of them teary-eyed. "Boss, it's all thanks to you this time." Yun Yang rolled his eyes in annoyance and said, "Now you know what's good for you?" Do you still dare to act so shamelessly in the future? Do you think you're so great? Do you think the 4 noble families are so strong? When you meet someone who's truly ruthless, what you can rely on is nothing. If it were not for today, the 4 noble young masters would have only scoffed at Yun Yang's lecture. At most, they would have agreed to it perfunctorily. Now, however, it was as if they had heard the morning bell, enlightened and enlightened. No more, no more. How would we dare? The 4 of them were ashen. Yin Yang looked at Dong Tianlong and said teasingly, "This lord, do you still dare to call yourself lord in the future?" Dong Tianlong's face was ashen as he shook his head like a rattledrum. Although the other 3 young masters were preoccupied, they could not help but burst out in laughter when they recalled Dong Tianlong's insufferably arrogant manner just now and his words. Although the 4 of them had regained their clarity of mind, they were still in a state of shock even after a long time. Dong Tianlong picked up his teacup to drink water to calm himself down and poured it directly on his face. Chiu Yun-san was the worst. He looked like his soul had left his body, his entire body was shaking non-stop and the muscles on his face were almost spasming. Rumor had it that Yun Zuyu was under Ling Xiaozui's protection. Now that Ling Xiaozui had come, he had truly appeared before his eyes. This, recalling how he had once wanted to take Yun Zuyu as a concubine, Chiu Yun-san could only feel the darkness before his eyes. There was no light to speak of. "I've really been blinded by lard. I think you guys shouldn't be called the 4 noble young masters from now on. Call yourselves the 4 courting death." Yin Yang smacked his lips, suddenly feeling that this nickname suited these 4 fellows too well. Chapter 141. Seeing that these 4 fellows who were scared out of their wits would not be able to recover anytime soon, Yin Yang began to check on his gains from this trip to the 1,000-feet lake. He did not feel any special changes when the divine water essence entered his body. Perhaps when these 4 fellows leave, I'll try it in the water and know the benefits of this thing. After all, it was the essence of water and had its own foundation. The real benefits might not be immediate. It was dusk on this day. A few major events had happened in Tiantang City. A man in green appeared at the entrance of Cirrus House as if he had appeared out of nowhere. Yun Zuyu seemed to have sensed it and rushed out to take a look. She could not help calling out in delight, "Brother Ling." This cry silenced the entire Cirrus House in an instant. Who was this person who could make Yun Zuyu call him Brother Ling? Was there even a need to ask? The universally acknowledged unrivaled expert, a living legend, Ling Xiaozui. Ling Xiaozui walked into Cirrus House with a smile. His otherworldly aura made those who saw him lower their heads automatically. With a sweep of his gaze, a formless pressure overwhelmed the entire Tiantang city. Watching Yun Zuyu happily bring Ling Xiaozui upstairs, the people below began to whisper to each other. "Ling Xiaozui is here. He's really here. So the legend is true. Ling Xiaozui is really Landlord Yun's big brother. Oh my god. This must be the reinforcement Yun Zuyu has called for. Of course, if I were to be bullied like that, I'd call for help too. She's doing her business here but she's being forced to marry and become a concubine. How can Yun Zuyu not think of a way to save herself? If I had such a backing, I would have moved out long ago. It's all good now. How did those people force Yun Zuyu back then? Now that her backing is here, there's a good show to watch, Retribution. This is the legendary Retribution. Yes, it's not that the time hasn't come yet. Now that the time has come, it must be done. Maybe Ling Xiaozui has received the news and flown here to help. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made such a high-profile appearance. That makes sense. But since he has appeared in such a high-profile manner, then those who bullied Yun Zuyu back then will definitely be in trouble. Let's wait and see. I didn't expect to come to the Cirrus House today. To be able to see the world's #1 expert, a legend of the world. Coming here today is so worth it, my heart is still pounding. Yi Zichen sighed. After more than an hour, when Yun Zuyu reappeared in the hall, the way everyone looked at her was different. If one were to say that they were condescending and covetous before, they were now filled with reverence and fawning. Ling Xiaozui had indeed been paying attention to this place. After a while. Boom! A loud explosion shook everyone. A clear and melodious voice said in a clear voice, "The tiny myriad treasure tower actually dares to bully my sworn sister. I also don't know who gave you guys such an outrageous courage, stirring up trouble in front of me. What's the point of keeping this broken building? What's the point of destroying it? Tell the myriad treasure tower lord, give me an explanation in the pugilistic world. From now on, the myriad treasure tower is not allowed to exist in Tiantang City." The voice was neither fast nor slow, there was no hint of anger in it, but the sense of eeriness invaded everyone's heart at the same time. Indeed, this god had really come to stand up for Yun Zuiyu. The entire building near the myriad treasure tower was originally located was actually split in the middle. Half of it was slanted to the left while the other half was slanted to the right. In the middle, there was only a crack from top to bottom, from width to width. The top was about 2 feet wide and there was only a slit at the bottom. It was extremely smooth. Obviously, this crack had been split open by a sword. Everyone in the 10,000 treasure tower was currently standing on the streets outside with pale faces. They were still shivering all over. A few of them were already drenched in sweat. They were working in the building and then the building split open. It was like a nightmare. Some of them were still in a trance, still thinking about the scene they had seen. Suddenly, a green silhouette flew up into the sky. Just as they were wondering what this fellow was doing, they saw a sword light that was like a waterfall, descending from the sky like the Milky Way. Then, 2 people who were chatting face to face saw each other inexplicably move a foot away from them. Looking down, both of them were standing on the edge of the cliff that was cut by a knife. This feeling was simply a buzzing sound, the hairs on their heads stood up. It was too terrifying. Too frightening. A moment later. The green silhouette descended above the imperial city and asked leisurely, "Where is Mi Kongquan?" In the palace, eunuch Mi was scared out of his wits, hiding in his room without making a sound. Although he had an extraordinary cultivation base, how could he dare go against the legend of this world? As a member of the Four Seasons Tower, he knew very well how terrifying Ling Xiaozui was. The Four Seasons Tower had long set an iron rule that one should never provoke Ling Xiaozui. If one were to violate the rule, death was death. The Four Seasons Tower would not make arrangements for one's funeral nor would it seek revenge. Mi Kongquan was praying in his heart, praying to the gods and Buddhas that he would hide in his room, hoping that Ling Xiaozui would be wary of Yutong's royalty and not threaten him with his life. However, with a loud boom, the walls of the room where Mi Kongquan was hiding disappeared while the roof above his head flew far away. It flew out for who knew how far, just like a huge umbrella. A clear voice spoke, "Keeper Mi is very cunning. Come, 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 eat my sword." Mi Kongquan fled like a flash of lightning, not even turning his head back as he cried out, "It's none of my business." Instead, he felt a piercing sword energy coming at him from behind. Mi Kongquan cried out, twisting his body with all his might and somersaulting into the air. Only then was he thankful that he had survived the legendary sword of the mortal world. However, he felt a chill on his shoulder as a transparent hole appeared at the icy spot. His mystical chi was frozen at once. With a cry, he fell from the air. He landed face first on the ground, splashing flowers everywhere with a loud thud. "I'll spare your life this time." The clear voice in the air said, "Be careful of your wretched life if there's a next time." The silhouette in green floated up as the clear voice spoke slowly, "Your Majesty of Yutong, please do not be angry. Ling Xiaozui has no intention of going against the royalty this time. I only seek justice. Now that justice has been served, the grudge has been settled. I bid farewell here and wish the Empire of Yutong a prosperous future." The voice faded away. His Majesty's voice came again, "It's all right. Since Master Ling is here, why not come down and have a cup of tea? I shall disturb you if we are fated to." Take care, Your Majesty. Ling Xiaozui's voice was already far away. The next moment, a sudden clap of thunder shook the entire Tiantang city. Ling Xiaozui's voice rang from another direction, He Hanqing. Then, a loud explosion followed. What followed was a dazzling radiance and a series of densely packed collisions that sounded like a series of cannons. In the next moment, a cloud of black air soared into the sky and spread across the horizon. It seemed to grow in intensity, but the majestic sword light grew brighter and more intense. The black air gradually could not hold on any longer and crumbled. A moment later, the black air in the sky dissipated and the haze was gone. As for the boundless sword light, it was as if a layer of light had been embedded in the sky, illuminating the masses and the world. A long howl rang in the air, He Hanqing, I'll spare your life considering that you're an old official of 3 dynasties and that you've been kind to the people in the past. However, you must know that the heavens are watching what you've done. There will naturally be someone to punish you for what you've done. An old voice spoke with indescribable agony, full of resentment, Ling Xiaozui, you've relied on your martial prowess to bully this old man, an old man with 1 foot in the grave. What kind of hero are you? Did you, Ling Xiaozui, rely on this to make a name for yourself in the martial world? Is this how the legends of this world are written? Or are the legends of this world just a joke? In the air, a clear sneer rang out, He Hanqing, say it again if you have the guts. Do you dare or not? The voice was filled with an oppressive threat. There was no longer any sound from below. In the air, a long howl rang out, don't say the martial world is far away, who says the secular world is far away? Pour wine on the clouds, and still get drunk. Not bad at all. The majestic sword light soared into the sky once again, reaching a height of 1,000 feet. With a loud bang, the clouds were dispersed by the sword light, forming a large hole. A ball of sword light charged straight into the hole and disappeared without a trace. The entire Tiantang city was silent. Extreme silence, extreme silence, extreme solemnity, it was suffocating. Even those who felt an itch in their throats and wanted to cough were holding it in with all their might. They were silent out of fear. No one dared to act rashly. Today, they had finally witnessed the power of the world's unrivaled expert. No wonder it was said that the mystical dragon was far away from the secular world. Soaring 1,000 feet into the sky and disappearing into the clouds, it was an unbelievable feat. Was he still human? Perhaps he was already an immortal on Earth now. Why would such a human legend find trouble with Old He? Whether it was in the imperial court or out in the world, Old He was a righteous man with a great reputation. Of course, he could actually compete with Ling Xiaozui. Although it was only for a moment, his cultivation base was unexpectedly sharp. Was there anyone in the empire of Yutang who could rival him? Could the 2 old marshals, Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin, do this? Was the image of the black gas from Old He? It did not seem to be a good thing. What Ling Xiaozui had said about man doing heaven watching, as well as what he meant by unbearable, was unavoidably suspicious and thought-provoking. At the residence of He beneath the intense battle, it was a mess. All the houses and residences had collapsed. The owner of the residence of He, Old He, was clutching his chest in agony as he sat in the mess, his face pale. He spat out a dozen mouthfuls of blood, his white beard dripping with blood. It was as if his spirit, chi, and spirit had been sucked away in an instant. The wrinkles on his face had deepened. There was only a sword mark on his chest, but it was a mark that did not even cut through his flesh. However, He Hanqing knew that the severity of this sword wound would not heal without at least 10 years. Within these 10 years, he could no longer use high-level mystical qi. Chapter 142. The first thing is, of course, thanks. Thanks to C's Soul Robe, Bear Child, Wu Hui, Original Heart, Chicky, Lewd Emperor family, and the other alliance leaders for their support. Thanks to the brothers who are able to persist in subscribing. Thanks to the brothers and sisters who have been recommending the book. Thanks to the hard work of the managers. On the 1st of August, I was very happy. At the gathering of my comrades, the old captain did not allow me to drink and forced me to come back and explode. Cough, he even wanted to beat me up while holding a glass of wine. The second thing is the monthly rankings. Everyone wants to fight for it. All along, the Fong family has been fighting in the pugilistic world for many years. I have always insisted on one thing: in the book group, review section, and other places that belong to the book, it is not allowed to mention or insult any author or any book. Respecting all opponents is respecting yourself. Everyone should do their own thing. I repeat, all the disciples of the Fong family, stick to our formation. We can be happy, play, and read books. However, those who come to make trouble, we will not tolerate them. Those who come to sow discord, we will not tolerate them. Our results are still passable. At the very least, it is much better than Ao Shirsia Jun's start. However, there are still many books that are stronger than us. To be strong, there must be a reason to be strong, and they must pay a lot. I envy and respect the existence of the strong. I will not be jealous and slander them. There are many books that are stronger than us, and I will treat these books and these people as my goals. I will learn, respect the strengths of others, and move forward step by step towards my goal. That is all. War, of course we will fight. Retreat is also impossible. When the Fong family starts a war, we never retreat halfway. This is what I have always insisted on. The third thing, someone joined the group to insult the manager. The insults were very harsh. The manager is a girl, and she cried after being scolded. I cannot stand this kind of thing. Management is the most precious wealth of an author, and also the most precious foundation of an author. After many years of hard work and accumulation, there is such a group of brothers and sisters following them. The manager of the book group does not have any salary, and does not have any income. They are completely free to help the author deal with matters. No day, no night, no day, no night. I can proudly say that the Fong family has a lot of managers. The management team of the Fong family is very cohesive. Any author, any god, to have such a management team is something to be proud of. It is also the dream of any author. So, I cherish it. If the person who comes to scold me is a reader, I can only say that you are brainless. If the person who came to scold was the author, then I can tell you clearly, a person like you is not worthy of making a living in this line of work. 9,000 words were released at the 3rd chapter today. Not too much, not too little. I'm begging for monthly votes and recommendation votes. I hope everyone can understand and support me. Thank you. Chapter 143. Ling Xiaozui's strike was extremely sinister. Once he activated his high-level mystical qi, it would trigger the counterattack of the sword wounds that had accumulated in his body and explode within him. This was equivalent to adding a huge restriction to himself. From then on, he could no longer utilize power that surpassed the 8th peak. The mischievousness of the strike made He Hanqing grit his teeth. Ling Xiaozui had definitely done it on purpose. He clearly knew who he was, but he still made a move. He wanted to put him in danger. But could he tell the truth? Once he revealed the truth, he would be the one who would be exposed. Ling Xiaozui had come for He Hanqing, not Supreme Lord Springfrost. He could only swallow the humiliation and change of events. At the most secluded corner of the residence of He, the ground had been lifted. The 9 people who had been imprisoned within, who had no room to escape, were now freed. At this moment, he was rolling and crawling to escape. Although his body was weak, his desire to live was strong. The moment they saw He Hanqing, all 9 of them revealed expressions of extreme hatred. A few of the guards in the residence of He had just recovered from the shock. Seeing that the situation had changed, they wanted to stop the 9 people and interrogate them. He Hanqing sucked in a deep breath, a sinister glint flashing across his eyes. He sighed dejectedly and waved his hand, saying, "Let them go." This was yet another trap. It was a more ruthless trap set by Ling Xiaozui. Ling Xiaozui looked like he had left, but Hanqing was aware that he had not really left. He had released the restraints on these people but did not rescue them directly, leaving them here to escape on their own. What was the meaning of this? If he were to silence these people again, Ling Xiaozui would definitely appear immediately to save them. Moreover, he would have a reason to kill him then. Therefore, even though these people knew some of his secrets, he couldn't kill them to silence them. He even had to protect them carefully and ensure that nothing happened to them. Otherwise, Ling Xiaozui would still come to question him. Hanqing was extremely frustrated about this, but he could do nothing about it. His mystical qi was sealed and his body was severely injured. The spectral path of the soul and the abyss path of flesh were techniques that he could not use before he recovered. Ling Xiaozui. You and I cannot exist under the same sky. Hanqing spat out another mouthful of blood and stood up shakily. However, he staggered and almost fell. The 9 remaining soldiers glanced at the He residents with hatred, then silently supported each other as they walked out. There were countless guards in the He residence, but no one came out to stop them. Finally, the 9 of them supported each other and walked out of the He residence's main gate. Then, they disappeared into the crowd. Those who were fated to witness this scene could not help but wonder if what Ling Xiaozui had said was true. Had old He, a loyal official of Yutang, really done something despicable? Were the 9 cripples not proof of that? Ling Xiaozui had left. Cirrus House's business was booming. Moreover, the customers who came and went seemed to be of a higher quality. Each and every one of them was immaculately dressed, elegant, gentle, and polite. Their smiles were amiable. Although the original guests would not do anything particularly out of line, they would occasionally grope the passing maids. But now, all of them were well behaved, even more obedient than children in class. There was not even a situation where they spoke in a loud voice. The 4th prince had become famous. Ling Xiaozui had been here and had done such a great deed. What the 4th prince had done had earned everyone's admiration, to be able to send 500 soldiers to capture Ling Xiaozui and label him as a fugitive. He was truly an oddball. Everyone felt an inexplicable urge to laugh when they talked about this matter. How did such a blunder appear? The crown prince and the other princes were even more delighted at his misfortune. I've been relying on this joke of the 4th prince to survive these 2 years, said one of the princes. Yin Yang stretched his body and lay in the pond of his home. A sense of contentment rose within him. Yin Yang could clearly feel that every cell in his body was cheering in joy. Finally, he was in the water. He hadn't specifically trained to swim before, but at this moment, he naturally felt that there was no barrier between him and the water around him, and he was completely one with it. He was even more at ease than a fish. Even when he buried his head in the water, there was no sense of suffocation. It was as if his skin could breathe and there was nothing to worry about. Yin Yang began to imagine what it would be like if he were to cultivate his 4th brother's water spirit conjuration. As he pondered, he could not help anticipating it. However, what he needed to do now was to improve the fog of cloud conjuration, mystique wind conjuration, and fiery charm before cultivating the art of crimson devil and thunder crash conjuration to the same level. There was nothing else to be said. Yin Yang understood the principle of not biting off more than he could chew. Although he was already greedy and could not chew off more than he could chew. The 4th prince came to the residence of Yun to apologize, but he turned back halfway. Ling Xiaozui had already left. What was the use of apologizing? However, Yin Yang had become mysterious from then on. Ling Xiaozui had been a guest at his residence and it was said that they had had a pleasant conversation. Ling Xiaozui had promised to play and fish at the 1,000-feet lake with Yun Yang, calling each other brother and becoming like old friends. Young Master Yun Yang was indeed remarkable. I thought that young Master Yun Yang was only a popinjay, but it seems that he isn't. Seems like what? Of course, he can't be a popinjay. How can a mere popinjay be friends with Ling Xiaozui? That makes sense. Young Master Yun must be someone with great wisdom, hiding in the mortal world to train himself with worldly emotions. I'm guessing that young Master Yun must be an unparalleled expert as well. As the saying goes, dragons befriend dragons and phoenixes befriend phoenixes. How can Ling Xiaozui's friends be ordinary? Not only is young Master Yun handsome, he's also skillful and has an earth-shattering cultivation base. He's so elegant too. Oh, I'm speechless. How can a person be so perfect and captivating? Wake up, brother. You're a man. Even if you like him, would he like you? No matter what, Cirrus House's Yun Zuyu would be safe with Ling Xiaozui's arrival. Young Master Yun Yang, too, would make a name for himself. Along the way, there would be many who would smile at him in a flattering manner. A few days passed and the situation was unprecedentedly peaceful. During this period of time, Yun Yang went into closed-door cultivation. Whether it was the invitation from Cirrus House or other noble families, or the visit of the 4 noble young masters, he rejected all of them. He cultivated in silence. Since the day Chen San had brought the 9 remaining soldiers to the residence of Yun to express his gratitude, Yun Yang could temporarily be at ease about the spectral path of soul and abyss path of flesh. Now, however, eunuch Mi was deep in the palace and old He and He Hanqing were still not people he could handle, despite being severely injured. There were no other clues. Naturally, Yun Yang placed all his focus on improving his ability. Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan sent someone to ask about it and did not come again. Instead, it was Tai Zheng who came a few times to leave a message for Marquis Yun, "Take care of my son for me." Marshal Tai ran back and forth but he did not see Yun Yang. Yun Yang's diligence in cultivation during this period of time had reached an insane level. It was because a brewing storm was already on its way and was about to descend. It was less than a month away from Tai Zheng's wedding. Some of the generals from various countries who had set off earlier had already entered Yutang's territory. The famed generals from various countries had gathered in Tiantang City. How could it be quiet when these people were together? By then, there would be a storm. Yun Yang's diligent cultivation was to prepare himself to face all of this. Finally, the 15th of September arrived. Yun Yang had come out of his closed-door cultivation because he had no choice but to do so today. There was someone who had been waiting for him in the residence of Yun for 3 days. This person's identity was unique. Very unique. Oh, isn't this Sister Lingxiu? How does Sister Lingxiu have the time to visit my humble residence? Your presence brings light to my humble abode, it's my honor. Yun Yang greeted her with a friendly smile. In front of him, a young girl in a tight outfit sat upright. This young girl was dressed in black, and although she wasn't an outstanding beauty, she was extremely delicate and pretty. Her entire body carried a bone-chilling aura, like a snow lotus in a world of ice and snow, icy cold that seeped into one's bones, elegant and beautiful. She was tall and slender, exuding an indescribable aura of heroism. She had a pair of sharp brows that were rarely seen on a woman's face. Although she was a woman, just by sitting there, she gave off the aura of a great general who wielded authority and commanded thousands of soldiers and horses. A murderous aura naturally flowed between his brows, making him look extremely awe-inspiring. Shengguan Lingxiu. This was a person that Yun Yang could not afford to ignore nor disrespect. Shengguan Lingxiu was only 20 years old, only half a year older than Yun Yang. However, her family background was one that all the empire of Yutang's subjects would revere. The Shengguan family of generals. The stars in the night worshipped the Big Dipper, the generals of the world respected the Shengguan. The 3 brothers of Shengguan Lingxiu's great-grandfather had once dominated the battlefield, invincible. The 3 brothers had even served as the empire of Yutang's east, west, and west marshals respectively. The brothers had 3 marshals and the father and son had 10 generals. Back then, the Shengguan family alone had supported the entire board of Yutang's military. However, these 3 old generals, without exception, all died on the battlefield in their twilight years, and their corpses were buried on the battlefield. The youngest one was already 58 years old when he perished on the battlefield. After that, the 9 brothers of Shengguan Lingxiu's grandfather's generation had perished in the eastern border, one after another. When it came to Shangguan Lingxiu's father's generation, the Shangguan family had even more men, a total of 36 uncles and brothers. They were known as the Shangguan 36 Tiangang Tiger Generals. However, all of them had perished on the battlefield during the Empire of Yutong's foreign wars. When 13 of them had perished, they had yet to marry. Shangguan Lingxiu was the youngest girl in the Shangguan family. She had 2 older brothers and 28 cousins who had perished on the battlefield in the War of Resistance against the foreign invasion 5 years ago. None of the men had survived. No matter what kind of war the Shangguan family had been through, not a single member of the Shangguan family had surrendered. Not a single one of them had escaped. They had all been killed in the war against the foreign enemies. The Shangguan family's blood had been splattered all over the Empire of Yutong. Now, the Shangguan family of generals, which had once prospered and intimidated the world, was left with a family of widows and orphans. Among the younger generation, there was only Shangguan Lingxiu, a lady, and 6 children who were only 9 and 4 years old. They were all Shangguan Lingxiu's nephews. The youngest one was even a posthumous child. His Majesty the Emperor had once written, "A family of loyal martyrs, the Shangguan family of generals." Chapter 144. Ever since all the adult men in the Shangguan family had died in battle, there had been no movement from them. The elders, women, and children had only stayed at home to teach the young children, to practice martial arts and study, hoping that one day, they would fight on the battlefield again and rebuild the family's reputation. It looked like the Shangguan family would be quiet for the time being, at least. However, once something happened to old Mistress Shangguan, even the current emperor would not dare neglect it and would treat it with caution. Shangguan Lingxiu, who was in front of Yun Yang, was the person who held the Shangguan family of generals' younger generation. Like her name, this woman was extraordinarily beautiful and well-versed in worldly affairs, but she did not go out easily. However, since she had come to the Yun residence to look for Yun Yang today, there must be something that Yun Yang could not ignore and that he had to show himself. It was not for anything else but the name of the Shangguan family of generals alone that Yun Yang was naturally filled with respect and could not refuse. Young brother Yun. Shangguan Lingxiu smiled faintly and said, "My purpose of coming here is to ask young brother Yun to introduce me to Ling Xiaozui, Master Ling." Her words were laced with an obvious militaristic aura. They were clean and direct, going straight to the point without beating around the bush. "Ling Xiaozui?" Yin Yang said, "He has left. I wonder what Sister Lingxiu wants to see Ling Xiaozui for. Can you explain it to me? Let's see if I can be of help." It was unreasonable to probe into other people's affairs, but Shangguan Lingxiu hoped to contact Ling Xiaozui through him. No matter how much Yun Yang believed in the Shangguan family style, he had to clarify the other party's intentions before deciding whether to help. Shangguan Lingxiu said in a low voice, "Even if young brother Yun didn't ask, I would have said it. My nephew has 3 innately awakened 8 chakras. I want to try my luck and see if one of them can catch Master Ling's eye and enter his tutelage. If this can be done, the Shangguan family will have a few experts in the future. They'll have an additional ability to protect themselves when they go on the battlefield in the future," Shangguan Lingxiu said with a lowered brow. Speaking of the ability to protect themselves, Shangguan Lingxiu could not help but lower her head. Yin Yang was shocked. Go on the battlefield in the future? How old are they? Why are you talking about galloping on the battlefield? Shangguan Lingxiu said proudly, "The 3 nephews I mentioned earlier are already 6 years old. The Shangguan family is born for the battlefield, we live for war. The sons of the Shangguan family step onto the battlefield at the age of 15. Serve the country and defend against foreign enemies." Yin Yang's heart skipped a beat. He was only 6 years old, but he was already planning to go on the battlefield and kill enemies for his country. However, everyone in the Shangguan family was happy to see this happen. They even instinctively thought that it was a matter of course. It's a pity that Master Ling has already left. I don't know where he went either. It's hard to find him. Yin Yang shook his head and sighed, an inexplicable feeling welling up in his heart. How much had the Shangguan family of generals sacrificed for the sake of a family of loyal martyrs? How much more do I have to pay? It was as if in the stubborn hearts of this family, a man should go to the battlefield and return with his dead body on the battlefield. This was a respectable family. Yet, it was also a family of great sorrow. Shangguan Lingxiu looked dejected as she murmured, "Actually, I'm only here to try my luck. Even if I did see him, Master Ling might not be willing to accept a descendant of such a family who carries a blood feud with him as a disciple. My original intention was only for these young brothers to go on the battlefield in the future." Shangguan Lingxiu sighed softly and stood up. "Young brother Yun, thank you. Farewell." She had told him everything and left immediately if it did not work out. Yin Yang could not help saying softly, "Actually, these young brothers don't have to go to the battlefield in the future." With her back facing Yun Yang, Shangguan Lingxiu said faintly, "Generations of the Shangguan family have perished on the battlefield. If they don't go to the battlefield to kill their enemies, who will be the one to avenge the blood debt of their ancestors? This is the mission of the Shangguan family's men, it's their destiny." Yin Yang was stunned when he heard what Shangguan Lingxiu said. The Shangguan family's men have died on the battlefield. Whether they've been framed, ambushed, or killed in a direct confrontation, it's the destiny of a soldier. There's no regret. We won't seek revenge outside of the battlefield, lest we humiliate our ancestors' noble name. However, this blood debt still exists. Since it exists, let it be settled on the battlefield. Before the two armies, a life for a life. Use the enemy's blood and lives to wash away this grudge and avenge our ancestors. Shangguan men are born for the battlefield, live for the war, die for the country, and die for the people. Shangguan Lingxiu said vehemently, "This is the family motto of the Shangguan family. Born for the battlefield, live for the war. Die for the country, die for the people." Yin Yang repeated the words in a murmur. This was the family motto of the Shangguan family of generals. Watching as Shangguan Lingxiu turned to leave, the tall silhouette of a girl was obviously graceful, but the young lady of the Shangguan family had exuded a domineering aura. Her steps were firm. Once she started, she did not turn back. She was only a young lady of 20 years of age, but she exuded a steely coldness. "Sister Lingxiu," Yin Yang could not help calling out. "What is it?" Shangguan Lingxiu turned to look at Yun Yang and suddenly smiled. "I'm leaving." She turned and waved. "If Sister Lingxiu's original intention is to let your nephews cultivate mystical qi to enhance their abilities and protect themselves, you don't have to look for Ling Xiaozui," said Yun Yang. "I have some methods here as well." With her back facing him, Shangguan Lingxiu shook her head and said, "We have cultivation methods too, we know each other. The real reason I'm looking for Ling Xiaozui isn't for any cultivation method, but to find a support for my nephews that can protect their lives. That's all. The so-called reason is only an excuse." Shangguan Lingxiu smiled sadly. The men of the Shangguan family will never return once they go to the battlefield. We've known this for a long time. It's an irreversible fate. No enemy dares to let the descendants of the Shangguan family of generals grow at ease. Although all the generals in the continent respect and admire the Shangguan family of generals, the descendants of the Shangguan family will only suffer worse once they go to the battlefield. No country's military hopes for the Shangguan family of generals' revival. Shangguan Lingxiu said calmly, "When my nephews go to the battlefield, that's when they die. However, our mission is on the battlefield. We can't not go, we're destined to go. That's why I've looked for Ling Xiaozui today, hoping to ask for a talisman for my nephews. Although I know that the enemies on the battlefield may not be willing to acknowledge this talisman, I still want to try. However, Master Ling's absence proves once again that this is the fate of the Shangguan family's men. Thank you, young brother Yun." Shangguan Lingxiu strode away. Her long silhouette disappeared before Yun Yang's eyes. Yin Yang was still in a daze, his thoughts unsettled for a long time. The autumn wind howled above Tiantang City. At this moment, the backyard of the Shangguan clan was bustling with activity. It was a small drill ground. An old woman with a head full of white hair stood coldly by the side of the drill ground with her arms behind her back, watching the movements within without missing a single detail. 6 children stood in a row in the drill ground. The oldest looked to be in his teens while the youngest was no more than 5 or 6 years old. They were all young children. The group of children were in a horse stance, and at this moment, every one of them was already drenched in sweat. Steam was rising from their bodies, and their sweat had already soaked the ground beneath their feet, but they were still doing their best to persevere. Their tiny bodies were already struggling as they swayed. The eyes of the younger ones were filled with tears, big droplets of sweat rolling down their cheeks, but they kept their mouths shut, unwilling to cry out loud. Hold on. The old mistress's gaze was cold, ignoring the pathetic state of her grandchildren. Finally, a child's body swayed and fell to the ground with a thud. Then, he fainted. Drag him away. The old mistress hollered. Plop, plop. After a while, the other children fainted as well, unable to take it anymore. Rest for a quarter of an hour. We'll begin the horse archery training after that. The children who had rested regained some of their strength and climbed onto the horses' backs agilely. Gritting their teeth, they bounced up and down on the horses' backs, performing all sorts of movements. They slanted from the horse's back, crawled under the horse's belly, flipped onto the horse's back from the other side, and drew their bows immediately. There were a total of more than a dozen movements, and they continued to repeat them over and over until the steed could no longer hold on, but the 6 children did not stop. However, these children had already used up too much energy when they were squatting in the horse stance, so how much could they recover after a quarter of an hour of rest? They were already exhausted after struggling to hold on for so long, and they were only relying on one breath to hold on. Even with this breath, they were out of breath. Finally, one of the youngest children suddenly swayed and fell off the steed. This slip was different from before. A slip in the horse stance would at most cause one to fall to the ground, but when one fell from the horse under one's crotch was still moving freely. The danger level had increased exponentially. The warhorse's hooves were about to step on the young body due to its uncontrollable movements. Don't move. The old mistress bellowed. Those who were about to rush out to rescue the child immediately stopped in their tracks. They could only look at the scene with worried eyes. The eyes of a few noblewomen at the side were already red, tears welling up in their eyes. The child who fell from the horse twisted his body with all his might, struggling to move a little on the ground. The horse's hooves almost brushed past his face as he fell to the ground with a thud. However, the other horses were already charging over. Chapter 145. The child could not even stand up in time and could only roll on the ground. His reaction was pure instinct. It was an instinct to avoid danger and seek survival. The 6 horses brushed past him as the crisis was finally averted. It was only then that the child spun and stood up from the ground. Just as he stood up, his vision darkened and he fell to the ground once more. The extreme escape from the life and death juncture just now had only been completed by stimulating all of his potential. Now that the crisis was over and he stood up, he could no longer hold on and fainted. Wake him up. The old mistress was furious. How can he faint at a time like this? Wake him up with cold water. Practice again. A noblewoman beside her could no longer hold it in and pleaded, Granny, please, let them rest. Xiao Wu'er, he's only 6 years old. On the other side, Shangguan Lingxiu bit her lips tightly. There was only a hard expression on her face, devoid of the gentleness of a woman. Sigh. The old mistress closed her eyes, feeling a pang of sourness in her heart. Her heart that had never wavered finally softened this time. Why don't we? Just as the old mistress spoke, Shangguan Lingxiu hollered, No. No rest. No one can rest until it's time. Her voice was resolute, leaving no room for discussion. Lingxiu. The middle-aged lady beside her was spitting fire. Are you trying to torture them to death? Shangguan Lingxiu bit her lips tightly. This small drill ground has existed in the Shangguan family for more than 70 years. For more than 70 years, the men of the Shangguan family have all trained their martial skills here before they fight in the battlefield. I was born late, so I didn't have the fate to see my grandfather training here. Shangguan Lingxiu said loudly, but I've seen my father and uncles training here. Training here. I've also seen my brothers running around here, gritting their teeth and bleeding, training themselves since they were 3 or 4 years old. Each of them gave it their all, really. Shangguan Lingxiu said loudly, but even though they fought so hard, they still died in the battlefield. The intensity of my training now is only slightly higher than when I was your age. It's still far from enough. I'd rather see them die in this small drill ground than to see them fall on the cold battlefield under the hooves of the enemy's horses. If they become our enemies, they will be promoted to nobility. Continue. Continue practicing. If it's not time, you can't rest even if you die. There's no mercy for anyone. All of you, continue practicing. Shangguan Lingxiu's pretty face was flushed, her gaze like a burning flame. Quickly, or I'll whip you. Under the urging of the whip, the 6 children once again climbed up the horse shakily. Gritting their teeth, they continued to practice the various movements. This is the Shangguan family of generals. Shangguan Lingxiu hollered, this is how children of the family of generals are. Either you step on your enemies' corpses and carry your enemies' heads to revive the Shangguan family of generals' glory. Otherwise, you will fall under the enemy's blade and become their meritorious service. This is the fate of the Shangguan family of generals' men. There is no other way. The shrill cry was sharp and ear-piercing in the autumn wind, making the whistling autumn wind even colder. It was evening in the afternoon. Shangguan Lingxiu brought her nephews out, remaining silent along the way. The further they went, the more secluded it became. Finally, the group of aunt and niece arrived at a chaotic place. This was the red light district of Tiantang City. Countless gangsters, rogues, villains, and fugitives gathered here to survive in this dirty and dark place. In other words, this was an abandoned land. There was almost no one here during the day, it was quiet and deserted. However, when night fell, all sorts of monsters seemed to emerge from the ground. The place was bustling with noise. Some were drinking, some were cursing, some were fighting, and some were grabbing a girl on the street. Twisted faces could be seen everywhere in the dim light, menacing, horrifying, and cruel. A burly man stood up shakily and grabbed a woman with unkempt hair and a dirty face. Ha ha ha, come here, play with this lord. Before he could grab it, a small figure suddenly appeared. Then, the burly man's stomach was punched with a bang. Little bastard, how dare you hit your father? You're looking for death. The man felt as if his intestines had been punched out. Amidst the excruciating pain, he was enraged and began to retaliate mercilessly with punches and kicks. The little figure fighting him was only 5 or 6 years old. She nimbly dodged, jumped, and evaded the opponent's attacks. She seized every opportunity to strike. Her seemingly small and delicate fists were actually quite powerful. She struck repeatedly, causing the burly man to scream in pain. It seemed like the winner was clear, but the man was an adult after all. If a punch or kick landed on the child would not be able to withstand it and the outcome would be reversed. Even though he had gone through extremely strict training, he was only a 6-year-old child after all. Bang! With a cry, the child could not dodge in time and was kicked in the stomach by the man. His tiny body flew 30 feet away and fell to the ground, unable to get up immediately. The man charged forward again with a menacing grin, obviously intending to kill the child. In this world, the so-called kindness, conscience, and compassion were all empty words. The old, the weak, the women, and the children were all weaklings and would only become sacrificial victims. The strong men who had the upper hand would only cut the weeds and eliminate the roots, completely eliminating any potential disaster that might have sprouted. Shangguan Lingxiu clenched her teeth, her body trembling, but she did not move. She only watched the situation unfold with widened eyes. Seeing the man approaching, the child on the ground rolled with effort and stood up, clutching his stomach, his forehead already beaded with sweat. The burly man grinned and pounced on him fiercely, wanting to kill him. However, the child suddenly roared and dodged. Then, he jumped up high and stabbed his 2 fingers into the burly man's eye sockets. With an earth-shattering howl, the man pummeled the tiny body hanging on his body. The child let out a series of miserable screams, but he once again fiercely leaped up, his mouth of baby teeth fiercely biting the burly man's throat. Fresh blood immediately gushed out. The man screamed in terror, but his voice had already changed. His burly body fell down powerlessly. His thick and sturdy body only twitched for a moment before it stopped moving. His lower body was quickly soaked in crimson blood. The corpse, which had already returned to silence, suddenly moved again. A small head crawled out from under the corpse. Its head, face, and body were covered in blood. It was panting heavily, and its small body was even shaking from time to time. Obviously, the child had won this battle, but the price he had paid was not small. It was far beyond what a 6 or 7-year-old child could and needed to bear. Just as the child's panting subsided, he puffed out his chest and raised his hand, enduring the pain in his body. "I've won." The child had long understood his fate. There was no such thing as childhood for the Shangguan clan's men. There was only life and death, victory and defeat. Tears streamed down Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes as she bent down and opened her arms to welcome her nephew's triumphant return. In the dark, she hugged her nephew's trembling body tightly. "Well done. Third boy, you're a good boy. You're my pride." Shangguan Lingxiu's voice was choked. "My surname is Shangguan, my name is Shangguan Longtao, not third boy." Third boy leaned into his aunt's embrace and murmured, "I'm a Shangguan man, Shangguan Longtao." Before he could finish, he fainted. The brutal battle just now was too cruel for a child who was only 7 years old. He had used up all his strength and was severely injured, but he still wore a proud expression on his face as he fainted. "I've won. I'm Shangguan Longtao. I'm a descendant of the Shangguan family of generals." Next. Shangguan Lingxiu wiped her tears away forcefully. Late at night, Shangguan Lingxiu brought her 6 injured nephews to the west of the 1,000-feet lake, to the mass grave. Ghostly flames flickered, rising and falling. "Sleep here if you're tired." Shangguan Lingxiu's expression was cold. "The mound of the grave can't be used as a pillow. Sleep with your head down and your feet on the mound." However, no matter how tired they were, how could the children fall asleep in such a mass grave? What kind of courage would they have to fall asleep in such an environment? All of them cowered as they looked at their surroundings, their eyes filled with fear. "Aunt. I'm so scared." The youngest child tugged at Shangguan Lingxiu's sleeve and begged pitifully, "Let's go home." "No." Shangguan Lingxiu said resolutely, "The children of the Shangguan family of generals can't be afraid. We're not even afraid of the living, why should we be afraid of the dead? Right here, separate." Shangguan Lingxiu said sternly, "Keep a distance of 5 steps between each of you. Don't get too close to each other. Do you hear me? Don't get too close to each other. Both of you will be punished if you get too close to each other." The 6 children were separated just like that. After separating the 6 nephews, Shangguan Lingxiu hid behind a tombstone as well, watching her nephew's movements carefully. On the other side, the 6 children were still sobbing in fear. Suddenly, one of the children stood up. "I can't sleep. I'll do some boxing." Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. He actually began to practice. 1 punch and 1 kick, he practiced methodically. The other children's eyes lit up. "Let's practice too." The 6 children danced in the mass grave, each with their own style. Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes were wet as she watched the scene unfold. Then, she squatted down slowly and wrapped her clothes tightly around her, her eyes peeking around in fear. This heroine who looked fearless was now trembling all over. Chapter 146. Shangguan Lingxiu paled from the fright, but she forced herself to endure it. Compared to her 6 nephews, she was even more fearful of the mass grave. No matter how valiant and heroic Shangguan Lingxiu appeared to be, she was still a girl. Faced with the howling autumn wind that sounded like the cries of ghosts and the rats that wandered in and out of the bushes, even the slightest change could scare her. As a girl, no matter how hard she pretended to be strong and cool, her cowardly nature could not be changed. Humans were strange creatures. The more cowardly one was, the more one dared not close one's eyes. The more one would pay attention to the slightest movement around them, only to further frighten oneself. Rustling noises could be heard. Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes widened in fear as she watched a small round thing slowly walk towards her from the bushes. She felt her entire body stiffen. Her mouth was agape, her pretty face already pale with fright. As the movement approached, her breathing became more and more rapid. Her hands clutched the front of her shirt tightly, almost fainting from the fright. Finally, a porcupine crawled out from the bushes. Shangguan Lingxiu heaved a sigh of relief and could not help patting her chest. Compared to the rats, the porcupine was much cuter. However, at this moment, she clearly heard a long sigh from beside her. Shangguan Lingxiu felt goosebumps all over her body. She knew that she had not heard it wrongly. Indeed, there was something beside his ear, letting out a faint sigh. This was a mass grave. Who else could be sighing in the middle of the night? Shangguan Lingxiu was on the verge of breaking down. She nervously stood up, only to feel that her whole body was drenched in cold sweat. Her clothes had long been soaked, but she still insisted on looking at the location of her 6 nephews first to make sure that they were safe. However, when she saw that she could still hear the wind from her fists, she couldn't help but calm down, and the fear from before instantly disappeared. However, another sigh sounded in his ears. The nightmare came again. Shangguan Lingxiu yelped and jumped away instinctively, feeling her body go limp. You. He was so scared that his teeth were chattering, and he couldn't even speak clearly. She could only hear someone speaking from behind her. Why are you doing this? It spoke. The ghost spoke. There was really a ghost. Shuddering, Shangguan Lingxiu leaped 8 feet into the air and spun around in the air. Finally, she saw an elegant silhouette standing on top of the tombstone that she had been hiding in just now. In the dark of the night, the shadow looked even more shapeless, swaying as if its body was contorting at any moment. Ghost. Ghost. There's really a ghost. Shangguan Lingxiu was hovering in the air. In her panic, she was so frightened that she forgot to channel her mystical qi. She plummeted from the sky like a weight. However, she was now 8 feet in the air. If she were to fall, she would be gravely injured. The silhouette on the tombstone sighed again and floated, catching Shangguan Lingxiu in his arms. If he did not catch her, this heroine of the Shangguan family of generals would definitely be injured, even if she did not fall to her death. She had actually forgotten to circulate her mystical qi in midair. How unimaginable. Let go of me. Shangguan Lingxiu screamed instinctively. She was truly frightened, activating her female concealment skill. It's me. Yin Yang rubbed his nose helplessly. With this little bit of courage, he was not even as big as a sesame seed. He actually dared to bring 6 children to the mass grave to practice. He had to admit defeat. The 6 children were not so afraid, but the one who had brought them here was paralyzed with fear. Yes. Shangguan Lingxiu closed her eyes as she punched and kicked Yin Yang for a while. Only then did she feel that the voice was familiar. She tried to open her eyes, but all she could see was a helpless handsome face before her. Even his hair was messed up from her clutches, looking helpless as he stared at her helplessly. Who else could it be if not Yin Yang? It's you. Shangguan Lingxiu felt her courage returning at once. She was rejuvenated, the anger on her face disappeared and was replaced by an icy coldness. "Put me down," she cried. Yin Yang put her down, speechless. Shangguan Lingxiu patted herself, her face slightly flushed, but she asked stiffly, "Why are you here?" "I had no choice." Yin Yang spread his arms. "I was going home after drinking and happened to see you leading the 6 little ones this way. I was a little curious and wanted to see what you guys were up to. In the end, you brought me straight into the graveyard, and you didn't leave after entering the graveyard, wanting to spend the night here." Yin Yang patted his chest. "That really scared me to death." Shangguan Lingxiu blushed. "You've been watching from the side?" "I was curious." Yin Yang said, "Sister Lingxiu is a heroine indeed, not inferior to a man. This young brother is impressed by your courage." "I'm impressed." "I'm impressed by you, Sister Lingxiu." Shangguan Lingxiu's face was as red as fire. Suddenly, she flashed her sword with a clang and said angrily, "Yin Yang, I've long heard that your mystical skill is amazing and that you're famous in Yutong. Come, come, let me spar with you." The corners of Yin Yang's lips twitched. "Since when did you hear that my mystical skill is amazing? Famous in Yutong? Why didn't I know that I had such a great reputation? It's obvious that I've caught you doing something cowardly, so you want to vent your anger out of humiliation." Although Yin Yang had taken pity on her just now, he had no intention of being a punching bag now. "Hold on, Sister Lingxiu. I know all about your efforts," Yin Yang said, "but to me, doing this is equivalent to pulling the seedlings up to hasten their growth. There's no positive effect." Shangguan Lingxiu sighed slowly. "How can I not know that haste makes waste? It's better than doing nothing at all. Pulling the seedlings up to hasten their growth, even if the seedlings don't grow much, their enemies might not give them the time to mature." Yin Yang was stunned. As his thoughts raced, he actually felt that Shangguan Lingxiu's words made sense. At this time, the 6 children had heard the commotion as well. They ran over and saw their aunt standing by the side with another silhouette by her side. With a loud cry, the 6 tiny silhouettes charged over and formed a short human wall in front of Shangguan Lingxiu. 6 pairs of eyes glared at Yin Yang as they said in unison, "Don't bully my aunt. Batty." Yin Yang was amused. "Your aunt brought the few of you here to torment you on purpose. Why are you still protecting her?" The eldest among the 6 children said boldly, "And is training us, to give us more of the instinct to win in the battlefield. This is the Shangguan family of generals matter, what does it have to do with you? We, the men of the Shangguan family of generals, protecting girls is our responsibility. Leave quickly, you baddie, and we can spare you. Otherwise, what would you dare to do?" Yin Yang teased, amused. Shangguan Lingxiu, who was standing on the side, felt her eyes warm up as the sudden surge of warmth and gentleness almost overwhelmed her defenses. She forced herself to keep a straight face and said, "What do you 6 brats know? This is your Uncle Yun, Auntie's friend. It's more important for you to cultivate now." The 6 children were stunned. The eldest child said blankly, "Uncle Yun? I've never heard of him. Is he our uncle-in-law?" Shangguan Lingxiu was furious. "If you don't cultivate now, I'll..." Before she could finish, the 6 children disappeared with a whoosh. Looking at Shangguan Lingxiu's embarrassed look, Yin Yang could not help chuckling inwardly and said, "Children's words carry no harm. Sister Lingxiu, don't worry." Shangguan Lingxiu snorted and said, "You haven't told me what you're trying to do by following me." Yin Yang replied, "I didn't follow you. Today's encounter is really just a coincidence." Seeing that Shangguan Lingxiu was about to lose her temper, Yin Yang laughed and said, "Actually, it's because I can't bear to do it. Your training may be effective in the short term, but in the long term, it might ruin the cultivation path of these martial geniuses. Such a barbaric training method is not to be taken, it's not the right path for a cultivator." Shangguan Lingxiu did not speak, looking at him quietly. Yin Yang said, "Before Ling Xiaozui left, he had left me a mystical qi cultivation method, called the 3 talents mystical qi. However, after I studied it, I realized that although the cultivation method was marvelous, it wasn't suitable for my physique. Shengguan Lingxiu's eyes shone. The cultivation method left behind by Ling Xiaozui was more than enough, more than enough. Of course, Yin Yang did not have any cultivation method left behind by Ling Xiaozui. What he had taken out now was only the cultivation method of his 6th brother, Supreme Thunder, other than the Thunder Crash spell. Moreover, he was truly touched by the Shengguan family of generals. Yin Yang took out the 3 talents mystical qi cultivation method and passed it to Shengguan Lingxiu, but she took a step back to avoid it. She wiped her hands in agitation and said, will this work? This was given to you by Master Ling. Will you really be alright if you give it away just like that? Yin Yang could not help but feel amused. The lady before him was obviously tempted by the mystical book in his hands. If he were to take it back, she might even snatch it from him, but she had to say it in a roundabout way. It was adorable. He could not help but smile and say, it's all right. I can guarantee this. Besides, Ling Xiaozui knows that my physique isn't suitable, but he still left this cultivation method to me. The meaning behind this is obvious. Shengguan Lingxiu hummed in acknowledgement and carefully accepted the 3 talents mystical qi cultivation method. She began flipping through it page by page. Chapter 147. The contents of this cultivation technique were truly brilliant and incisive. Compared to the Xian Qi secret manuals that he usually saw, it was many times more brilliant. The more he read, the more shocked he was, and the more he felt the subtlety of this divine technique. This cultivation method is too precious. Shengguan Lingxiu's fair hands gripped the 3 talents cultivation method tightly. I'm afraid that I can't accept it, and neither can the Shengguan family of generals. Yin Yang frowned and said, Sister Lingxiu, you're being too serious. We're all children of the martial world, it's better to be more straightforward. I have no use for this cultivation method, why are you being so courteous with me? It'll be hypocritical if you continue to be so courteous. Shengguan Lingxiu could not help but chuckle, regaining her usual candid self as she said, all right, I'll accept it. Young brother Yun, I'll remember this favor. Yin Yang smiled and said, the Shengguan family of generals has given me great honor by accepting my gift. However, Sister Lingxiu, you can't train them like this anymore from now on. Mystical qi cultivation is the priority. You'll also have to pay attention to the heaven and earth treasures, mystical stones and mystical crystals that can increase mystical qi. Right, mystical beast meat as well, it's an indispensable staple supplement for them. This is very important to cultivators who cultivate high-level mystical qi. It can't be neglected. Shengguan Lingxiu nodded heavily and said through gritted teeth, I understand. Yin Yang, if the Shengguan family of generals can regain its glory in the future, it's all thanks to you tonight. Sister Lingxiu, you're exaggerating. Yin Yang smiled calmly. If so, I'll take my leave. You should go back earlier as well, you don't have to work so hard in the future. Sigh, you might have to work even harder in the future because the financial resources needed to provide for these children's cultivation will be an astronomical figure. You have to be mentally prepared. Thank you. Shengguan Lingxiu stood up and bowed to Yin Yang respectfully. Yin Yang laughed and turned to leave leisurely. His long silhouette disappeared into the night in the blink of an eye. Shengguan Lingxiu sighed softly, looking at the direction where Yin Yang had disappeared. Then, her expression returned to its original hard calmness as she hollered, come here. Nephews, we're going home. Really, really? Yes, really. In the future, you don't have to work so hard, and you don't have to come here to train your courage. Really? Wow. That's great. The 6 little guys cheered and hugged each other. Shengguan Lingxiu was delighted to see the 6 little fellows so happy. He clutched the secret manual tightly in his hand, feeling a surge of excitement in his heart. In the future, it will be better. The Shengguan family of generals would recover. Yin-yang, thank you. By the time Yin-yang returned to the residence of Yun, the sky was already beginning to brighten. The truth was not as coincidental as what Yin-yang had told Shangguan Lingxiu. In fact, Yin-yang had been watching everything that happened in the Shangguan family of generals for the entire day. This included the 6 children being woken up in the early morning before the sun had even risen to train. First, it was breathing exercises, then long-distance running with weights, followed by various physical exercises. After everything was done, the east was only slightly pale. Yin-yang was speechless at the amount of effort he had put in. However, that was just the beginning. What followed was all sorts of training to fully stretch their muscles and bones. Only then did they begin with long and short weapons such as sabers, spears, swords, halberds, axes, hooks, and forks, as well as archery and horsemanship. There was only an hour in the afternoon that was considered a break. However, it was during this break that the children had to read military books and memorize classic battle examples while resting, accompanied by questions from time to time. What could be done to avoid this defeat? What could be done to turn defeat into victory under such circumstances? What could be done to preserve one's strength under such circumstances? Would one choose to retreat and preserve one's strength or fight to the death under such circumstances? Once the answer was wrong, it would be a punishment. Yin-yang felt a twinge of jealousy in his heart. These were only a few children. The oldest was only 9 years old while the youngest was only 6. Such training, or rather, such an atmosphere of survival, was simply too cruel. After dinner and a short rest, Shangguan Lingxiu brought them out again to the red light district of the Field of Chaos to find gangsters to fight and practice actual combat, experiencing the uncertainty of life and death. In the dead of the night, it was still not a complete rest. Instead, they were brought to the mass grave to train their courage. What the children had experienced throughout the day sent chills down Yin-yang's spine, chilling him to the core. This was a day for the children of a family of generals. Yin-yang sighed at the sky. Looking at the female elders in the residence of Shangguan and the numerous memorial tablets in the Shangguan Ancestral Hall, Yin-yang could not help but sigh. This was the sacrifice of a family of generals. Of course, Yin-yang understood why they had to do this. They did not want to torture these children on purpose. These children were their own flesh and blood. It could even be said that they loved these children more than anyone else. Yet, they had to do so. In addition, even if they felt that the training was extremely cruel, they could not prevent something even crueler from happening. These children's destinies and future were already determined when they were born. They would be trained hard since they were young, without a single good day. When they grew up, they would find a wife and settle down. Then, they would go to the battlefield. In the end, they would die on the battlefield. They would return with their dead bodies on the battlefield. This was the journey of their lives. Looking at the sorrow in the eyes of the widows and widows when they looked at their children, Yin-yang knew that they had long seen this day. Just like what Shangguan Lingxiu had said, no matter how much the military respected the Shangguan family of generals, once they were on the battlefield, they would never allow the descendants of the Shangguan family of generals to survive and rise again. Once that day came, it would be their own nightmare. Since the beginning of time, the legends of the so-called loyal family of generals had always ended up with no descendants, their families broken and dead. There had never been an exception. Without exception. What a tragic fate this is. Why would a family of loyal and meritorious officials meet such a cruel fate? Is this the fate of a general, the reward for doing my best to protect the country? Standing in the morning breeze, Yin-yang pondered for a long time. Could the tragedy of the Shangguan family of generals be avoided with Shangguan Lingxiu's current efforts? It was absolutely impossible. Once they stepped into the battlefield, life and death were but a matter of moments. The descendants of the Shangguan family of generals had always been the focus of the enemy. Only when this focus was gone would the others be at ease. Let me give you a hand. Yin-yang said faintly, the family of meritorious officials who have shed their blood for the country shouldn't end their bloodline. The Nine Heavens dictum was suddenly bustling with activity as all sorts of news began to pour in. All the important officials in the imperial court are suddenly attacking the military. This is sudden, without any prior signs. There seems to be something wrong with His Majesty's health. He doesn't look too well these days. I suggest that we pay attention. Many of the minor crimes committed by some of the middle and lower level officers are being exaggerated, and their wrongdoings are being pursued with the intention of being punished harshly. There are already 17 assistant generals being imprisoned. I think there must be a big reason behind this. Other than the crown prince, the princes are all close to the civil officials and distant from the military generals. The signs are getting more and more obvious. It looks like the two old marshals of the military are still able to control the situation, but in some minor aspects, they are beginning to retreat. This is not a good sign. Old he is currently bedridden. The crown prince has gone to visit him personally while His Majesty the Emperor has also visited him. There is no follow-up news regarding the incident of that day. It's gradually becoming inconclusive. The closest generals from various countries have arrived within 500 miles of Enchanting City. A few of the people from the towering wind pavilion that the Supreme Lord wants to investigate have appeared so far, but Shui Wuyin hasn't appeared. It's suspected that he has left Enchanting City. We're currently expanding the search area. Recently, there have been countless martial world figures of unknown origins entering Enchanting City and disappearing into the streets. Should we investigate further? The grassland has been lush this year and its combat power is at its peak. This subordinate estimates that the day of war is not far away. Dongxian, Daiyuan, Tianxi, and the other empires are preparing for war, using the entire nation's strength to transport rations. It's said to the public that it's to replenish the national treasury to deal with the legendary drought, but the real purpose is, Yunyang opened the nine heavens dictum. Dense, messy news spilled out one after another. After reading through the information, Yunyang could immediately sense the unique smell of war. The military's channels of information regarding the movements of the empires were far more than what he possessed. The imperial court must have long known about the news that he had received. However, with His Majesty the Emperor's intelligence and wisdom, he had yet to react. It was not unusual. The military was only relying on the three marshals, Qiu Jianhan, Leng Daoyin, and Tai Zheng to appeal. They were weak, and the court officials were obstructing them. The situation was not optimistic at all. What puzzled Yunyang the most was none other than the attitude of the court officials. Even if the literati disliked war and hated the military, even if the politicians suppressed the military in order to gain power, could they not see that the nation's safety was at stake? Why were most people so anti-war? It was strange indeed. Yunyang did not believe that the court officials were all short-sighted or blinded by the desire for power. His gaze lingered on the movements of the literati for a long time as he pondered, could this be related to He Hanqing? Could the hand that has been manipulating the empire of Yutong, or at least Enchanting City, be He Hanqing himself? What about His Majesty the Emperor? What's wrong with him? Yunyang felt his head swell as he pondered. Chapter 148. I'm afraid I'll have to find out for myself. Yunyang made up his mind and replied to a few of the important messages before putting the nine heavens dictum aside. He then began to focus on his cultivation to increase his ability. Another day and night passed. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei, who had gotten used to Yunyang's silence during this period of time, were now going about their own business as usual. Occasionally, they would glance at Yunyang's room, their gazes filled with worry. Perhaps in the entire world, only the two of them knew how much pressure their young master was under right now. It was a weight that was beyond anyone's imagination. When Yunyang walked out of the room once more, he saw Fang Mafei looking at him with a hesitant look. What is it? Yunyang gave him a sideways glance. Speak your mind. Fang Mafei hesitated for a long time before he finally said, nothing much. Yunyang frowned and wiped his face with a towel, saying calmly, was it your three sworn brothers with the surname Hu or the concourse of the underworld? Fang Mafei chuckled bitterly. Yunyang nodded. The concourse of the underworld, is it? Did they ask you to kill someone? Or did they ask you to leave me and return to the martial world? Fang Mafei sighed deeply and said, it was one of the 10 court kings who came to Tiantang this time. I don't know how he found me and asked me to leave this place. Yin Yang's expression did not change. What about you? Of course I won't leave, young master. Fang Mafei said hesitantly, but Lord King Qingguang's methods are impeccable. I'm afraid it will bring trouble to young master. Yin Yang said faintly, when your Lord King Qingguang arrives, tell him that I want to meet him. Fang Mafei replied, yes. For some reason, Fang Mafei's heart calmed down upon hearing Yin Yang's words. Although his young master's mystical skill was still very weak, Fang Mafei was suddenly relieved. He was filled with endless confidence in his young master. If his young master said it was possible, it would definitely be possible. If his young master was confident, it would definitely be done. You don't have to follow me today. I'm going somewhere alone. Yin Yang said, you can cultivate at home. The earlier I break through to the 8th peak, the better. Yes, young master. Have you already broken through? Fang Mafei looked at the divine glow on Yin Yang's face and asked doubtfully, the 5th peak? Yin Yang smiled faintly and did not answer, walking out the door. The 5th peak. Yin Yang had already broken through to this level a few days ago. During this period of time, his fog of cloud, mystique wind, and starfire mystique skills had all broken through to the 5th stage. Thunder crash conjuration and art of crimson soul had also broken through to the 3rd stage. These mystical cultivation methods and mystical skills were Yin Yang's greatest reliance at the moment. However, the price to pay for this was, all the cultivation resources that he had accumulated previously were used up once again. Profound stones, profound crystals, fine jade. Profound cores, heavenly treasures. Right now, Yin Yang felt that he was a typical pauper. Other than gold and silver notes, he had nothing else. He was so poor that he only had money left. Yin Yang went out. A gentle breeze blew past and quietly entered the palace. Then, he appeared once more, but this time, he returned to his residence of Yun. Yin Yang frowned and thought for a moment. Finally, he gritted his teeth and went out again, sprinting towards the marshal's residence. Along the way, he had sensed several times that someone was following him, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not find the stalker. The residence of Yun was not far from Marshal Chiu's residence. In less than an hour, Yin Yang had already arrived at the gates of the marshal's residence. Please report that Marquis Yun's son, Yin Yang, is grateful for old Sir's concern and has come today to express his gratitude. Yin Yang was courteous and refined. Please wait a moment, young Master Yun. The guard's reply was equally respectful. After all, the name of Tiantang City's young Master Yun had already spread throughout Yutong and was well known throughout the world. Who did not know of him? If it had been someone else, perhaps they would have felt uncomfortable that they were relying on Ling Xiaozui's reputation to intimidate others. However, Yin Yang was not one to feel uncomfortable. He didn't feel the slightest bit uncomfortable. On the contrary, he was looking forward to some other adventure. It would be even better if he could find another one that he could use as a tiger's skin. For example, Dugu Cho or someone else. Such experts were legends and myths. It would not be too much even if 8 to 10 of them came every day. Use your reputations to suppress these demons for me so that I have time to plan my affairs. This bastard actually dares to come. Hearing Yun Yang's name, old Marshal Chiu was instantly enraged. He had nowhere to vent the pent-up anger that had been building up in the imperial court for the past few days. This fellow had delivered himself to his doorstep. He was the perfect punching bag. Get that brat to roll in here. The old marshal roared angrily. This sentence almost made the reporting guard laugh out loud. Yin Yang was still calm when he rolled in. Greetings, old sir. It's been a long time since we parted that day. Old Sir looks even better than before. What a joyous occasion. This is Yutong's fortune, the world's fortune. Old Marshal Chio's face darkened, almost suffocating from the compliment. It's good enough that your father hasn't been angered to death by you. This bastard, how dare he say it's been a long time. This old man has been there 3 times. The first time you avoided me, the second and third time you died in bed, unable to even open your eyes. How could this old man have met you? How dare you say that? What fortune? It's Yutong's fortune that this old man is alive and well, it's a fortune to the world as well. Other than the empire of Yutong, which empire on the continent doesn't wish for this old man to die early? What are you doing here, child? Old Marshal Chio sat on the armchair and slanted a glance at the child. The more he looked at him, the more he felt that this fellow's handsome face was detestable. He could not help but say viciously, "You're a man, but you have such a pretty face that's softer than a woman's. Aren't you embarrassed to walk around the city with it every day?" Yin Yang grinned. "You're right. I also think that I'm too good-looking, making too many people feel ashamed of themselves. However, I can't be blamed for this. Honestly, I'm not afraid that you'll laugh at me, but I've actually wanted to disfigure my face for a long time now." The old marshal was exasperated. "Spit it out if you have something to say." I'll do it now." Yin Yang chuckled before his expression turned unprecedentedly serious. The old marshal's heart sank when he saw Yin Yang's expression. By the looks of it, this child, did he really have something to say? "It's like this, old marshal. I wonder if you've noticed that His Majesty isn't quite himself during this period of time?" Yin Yang asked after considering his words. "What?" The old marshal sat up straight, his gaze as sharp as a hawk's. He stared at Yin Yang without blinking. "What are you trying to say?" Yin Yang coughed. "It's not that I want to say, but," as he spoke, Yin Yang looked left and right, staring at the door. The old marshal did not know whether to laugh or cry. "You've already exposed too much with your previous words, and now you're thinking of keeping it a secret? No one dares to eavesdrop on this old man here." Qiu Jianhan snorted. What was it that made this fellow act so mysteriously? Thinking of this, the old marshal could not help but feel nervous. Well, didn't Ling Xiaozui enter the palace a few days ago? Yin Yang thought about it and felt that it was best to push Ling Xiaozui out. This fellow's reputation was naturally the best choice to be the scapegoat, especially at such a critical juncture. Moreover, he had just entered the palace once, and he had a very good relationship with her. It was just right, logical, and a perfect match. The old marshal was tactful, his expression turning anxious. What did he find out? He told me after he went back that although he had only met His Majesty once, he could see that His Majesty's health is very poor. If he doesn't treat His Majesty soon, I'm afraid that His Majesty's life will be in a few months' time. Yin Yang lowered his voice. Boom! The old marshal kicked his chair over in shock, almost falling to the ground. His face was pale as he stared at Yin Yang, speechless. "Old marshal, don't be agitated. Ling Xiaozui said this, not me," Yin Yang explained hurriedly. "Is this true?" Qiu Jianhan asked word by word. Suddenly, a murderous aura that resembled a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood surged from him. No wonder His Majesty's face has turned gray recently. This old man thought that it was due to exhaustion. "How dare you!" Yin Yang lowered his head and did not speak. The more he spoke, the more mistakes he would make. It was better to remain silent. Since Sir Ling can see through it, then. The old marshal grabbed Yin Yang's hand and asked anxiously. He left 3 pills behind, but he didn't say that they would be effective. After all, it was only a glimpse, the results were too little. Yin Yang said nervously, "But the consequences of this matter are too important. It's really hard for me to find someone else to discuss this with." "You actually want to discuss this with someone else?" Qiu Jinhan's eyes widened as he paced around the room with a grim expression. Finally, he waved his hand and said resolutely, it's better to believe that it's true than not. Let's go, follow me to the palace immediately. Yin Yang was shocked. But you have no choice but to enter the palace. The old marshal's expression was grim. Whether Ling Xiaozui's words were true or not, whether the pills are real or fake, and even whether the 3 pills you mentioned are medicine or poison, all of these depend on you. It's impossible for you to leave just like that. Yin Yang pulled a long face. I've said that I'm not going to get involved in this matter, I'm not going to do anything about it. Sigh, I've been harmed by that old man this time. As he spoke, he was dragged out of the hall by Qiu Jianhan, a series of orders ringing in his ears. Prepare the horse. No, prepare the carriage. Enter the palace. Quick, quick, quick. Chapter 149. It was only when the palanquin was nearing the palace that the old marshal's ragged breathing finally calmed down a little. Child, I'm asking you one last time. Is this true? Qiu Jianhan looked at Yun Yang seriously. We haven't entered the palace yet, there's still time. There's still room for negotiation. But once you enter the imperial palace, if you make any careless mistakes, your little life will be gone no matter what. This nephew is a popinjay, but this is a serious matter that concerns the fate of the nation. How can I lie? This is absolutely true, Yun Yang said righteously. Don't mention popinjays. Qiu Jianhan looked like he was in a pinch. Whenever something happened, this fellow would pin the word popinjay on himself first, as if it was the best thing he could rely on. That was enough. Is being a popinjay so useful? Do you think this old man can't tell that you're pretending to be a popinjay? He kicked Yun Yang's butt with a loud thud. Cut the nonsense. Follow your father in. With the old marshal's status, his journey to meet the emperor was unimpeded. After reporting, both of them arrived at the royal study without a hitch. His Majesty's yellow silhouette was standing in front of the Empire of Yutang's territory map, a memorial in his hand. His brows were tightly furrowed and the atmosphere was heavy. Old Qiu, you're here. Seeing Qiu Jianhan enter, His Majesty did not put on airs as usual. He sighed and began to complain, the flood of East River is wreaking havoc, millions of people have lost their homes. Old Qiu, it looks like, the situation. As he spoke, he saw that Yun Yang had entered as well. He could not help being surprised and said, You're here too. Yun Yang pretended to be shocked and he heard the old marshal and put on an extremely surprised expression. This. Uncle you? Your Majesty, this. The old marshal slapped the back of his head and said angrily, still pretending. Speak properly. Speak properly. His Majesty guffawed and waved his hand, saying, We're not strangers, let's talk about family matters. Someone, give us a seat. Seeing the two of them sitting down, His Majesty the Emperor stood up and frowned. This flood from the east of the river. It was really unexpected. It was too sudden. There was no way to deal with it. The sudden flooding of the old Dragon River is most likely related to the series of torrential rains that occurred some time ago. The water level rose again and again until it finally caused the dam to burst. 36 districts on the other side were affected. It is truly a natural disaster. The old marshal sighed. However, to the Empire, this natural disaster is like adding snow to snow. What did the Empire's Ministry of Revenue say? Did they give any corresponding regulations? What rules can there be? It's just saying that the national treasury is empty, and even the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice. His Majesty rubbed the space between his eyebrows and sighed deeply. There are only 3 million taels of silver left in the national treasury, but this was originally intended to be used as a reward for the soldiers of the eastern frontier. This also includes a lot of military pay. Just the reward alone is far from enough, not to mention anything else. The Ministry of Revenue proposed that if we want to quickly quell the flood and stabilize the people's hearts, We need to first use this portion of silver for disaster relief. We won't reward the army for now, we should first help the millions of victims. Even so, it's still a drop in the bucket, far from enough. The old marshal's straight brows creased into a frown. He could not help saying, "Your Majesty, this can't be done. The soldiers are fighting and bleeding at the front lines, fighting for the country, dying 100 lives. If there isn't even basic compensation, or even insufficient military pay, wouldn't it disappoint the soldiers? Who would be willing to give their all on the battlefield then? Who would be willing to risk their lives? Your Majesty, please reconsider." His Majesty rubbed the space between his eyebrows again and said, "Of course I know this, but the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice now. Not only did the Ministry of Revenue say so, I can only say so as well." Qiu Jinhan's frown deepened. Looking at the emperor, he felt that something was amiss. His Majesty had always acted with an iron fist, swift and decisive. In the past, when faced with such matters, his solution was swift and decisive. He always had a way to make the entire imperial court submit. However, why was the response so weak this time? It was as if he was powerless and could only sigh helplessly. "I know that such a forceful recruitment will disappoint the soldiers, but this is an urgent matter. It's urgent to solve the flood problem. Perhaps, it's not difficult to think of a way to solve it." His Majesty rubbed the space between his brows, visibly troubled. "However, I really don't want to do this, it's too troublesome." The old marshal and his Majesty were talking. Yun Yang, on the other hand, had been observing the royal study from the moment he entered the room. As a place where his Majesty read through memorials and even gathered his close officials to discuss matters, the royal study was too ordinary. There were almost no decorations. Hence, Yun Yang had only seen 2 paintings when he first entered the room. One of them was on the wall to the left of his Majesty's chair. It was a scene of wind, cloud, thunder, lightning, water, and fire surging, and the earth churning. It looked like the atmosphere was strange, as if the heaven and earth had appeared at the same time, like the end of the world. However, Yin Yang knew that this painting represented the 9 Supremes. Its true meaning was nothing more than the 9 Supremes descending into the world and gathering in Yutong. His Majesty had actually placed a painting of the 9 Supremes here. Yin Yang could not help but feel a jolt in his heart. As for the other painting, it was behind His Majesty's chair. This painting made Yin Yang stare at it for a long time, almost unwilling to move his eyes away. The scene in the painting was obviously in the royal study. A young man stood tall with his hands behind his back, his head slightly raised as his eyes stared into the distance. This person was dressed in a bright yellow robe, embroidered with a few golden dragons bearing their fangs and claws. This caused the young man in the image to exude an air of nobility. The young man's face was gentle yet strong, his gaze was deep and brooding, as if he had seen the suffering of the people in the world. There was a clear sense of pity in his eyes. The bright yellow robe with the golden dragon's claws, this was the crown prince's uniform. Was the person in the painting the current crown prince? However, the person in the painting was clearly not the crown prince. He had seen the crown prince before, but Yun Yang was certain that he had never seen this person before. However, for some reason, Yun Yang, who had never seen this person before, felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity with him. It was as if the person had melded into his bloodline. Especially that pair of eyes. It was as if they had seen into his heart. Yin Yang felt his heartbeat quicken as he stared at the painting. His vision blurred as a sense of dizziness rose within him. A bolt of lightning flashed through his mind. Yin Yang suddenly recalled that day when he was on the brink of death. While he was unconscious, he seemed to have seen a few brothers on the road. The one leading them was the eldest, Supreme Earth. He had not worn a mask then. He had just looked at him, his gaze filled with love and compassion, as well as the doting trust he had for his brothers. Then, he had kicked Yun Yang and scolded, "Go back. Don't ever come back again." His face, his aura, his gaze, and his expression were exactly the same as the person in the painting. Eldest? Yin Yang's heart was in turmoil as the two words popped up in his mind. He felt a sharp pain in his heart. Suddenly, there was a sweet taste in his throat as he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. The old marshal and His Majesty the Emperor were discussing matters with a frown when they heard the sound beside them. Looking towards the source of the sound, it was Yun Yang spitting out a mouthful of fresh blood. Both of them were shocked. Upon closer inspection, they saw that Yun Yang's face was as white as a sheet of paper and his body was swaying. The old marshal was quick to catch him. His Majesty the Emperor was shocked as well, asking, "What's wrong with this child?" Qiu Jianhan sighed. "This little fellow. I don't know why, but he went berserk in his cultivation a few days ago. He almost fainted and laid unconscious on the bed for a few days. He's only been able to move for a few days now. I guess his old ailment has been triggered before he could recover." His Majesty the Emperor asked with concern, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Yin Yang caught his breath and chuckled humorlessly. After cultivating to recover, he said, "Your Majesty, don't worry. It's just that my meridians were out of balance and triggered the blood clots accumulated in my body. I couldn't hold it in and dirted Your Majesty's study. Please forgive me, Your Majesty." "Sigh, there's nothing wrong with being injured." His Majesty the Emperor waved his hand nonchalantly. "But you're really something. Why are you running around instead of resting at home when you're so severely injured? I'll summon the imperial physician to take a closer look at you later. Don't leave any lingering ailments." Yin Yang grinned. "I just can't sit still, haha." Yin Yang's churning qi and blood had been suppressed and color had returned to his pale face. Only the waves of shock in his heart had yet to calm down. It was his eldest brother's portrait. It was Supreme Earth's portrait. However, why would Supreme Earth's portrait be hung here? Furthermore, why was his eldest brother wearing the crown prince's robe? Yin Yang felt like the universe had exploded in his mind. He could vaguely guess what was going on, but he could not put his finger on it. Looking at His Majesty's face that was 80% similar to the one in the portrait, Yun Yang's heart was surging with emotions, unable to calm down. The old marshal glanced at Yun Yang curiously and could not help coughing when he saw that Yun Yang seemed to be in a daze. He had entered the palace today because of the information provided by this fellow. He was counting on him to speak and solve the mystery himself, but he had actually become mute at the crucial moment of entering the palace. "Your father has spent so much effort to bring you into the palace. I've even taken off my pants and you're only letting your father see this?" Yin Yang coughed and forced himself to retract his thoughts. He glanced at Qiu Jianhan and signaled with his eyes. Qiu Jianhan felt like his stomach was about to explode from the old marshal's glance. Did this bastard not hear a single word that he had said earlier? This old man has been wrangling here for so long and all I've done is waste a few mouthfuls of saliva. If they were not in the royal study, old Marshal Qiu felt that he would definitely press this child down, pull down his pants and spank his bottom. If his bottom was not broken, he would never be able to vent his anger. Chapter 150. Qiu Jianhan was inwardly angry, but he could only play along with Yun Yang. Despite his discomfort, his expression turned sour. With a dark expression, he said, "Why does this old official not quite understand what Your Majesty is saying? Your Majesty is in the prime of your life. Even if you have overworked yourself with the affairs of the nation, you might feel tired for a moment, but why would you feel powerless?" His Majesty rubbed the area between his brows again and said somberly, "I've been feeling uneasy lately, unable to sleep at night." Yun Yang's eyes stared unblinkingly at the spot between the emperor's brows. Why did His Majesty like to rub the area between his brows so much? How could he not know that the old marshal was reminding him? However, it was obvious that His Majesty had not been paying attention to anything recently. Even the wise and intelligent His Majesty did not understand the deeper meaning of the old marshal's question. He did not even notice the tone of Qiu Jianhan's words, let alone the fact that Qiu Jianhan did not look too good when he spoke. This was not normal at all. Yin Yang coughed and said, Your Majesty has been rubbing the area between your brows with your hand. Do you feel that your brain is in pain? Qiu Jianhan turned around abruptly, his gaze trained on the spot between the emperor's brows. As an official, it was taboo to look at the emperor directly or at the same level, what more to focus on the emperor's vitals. Even the closest official was no exception. However, the old marshal could not care less about this taboo now. Although he had felt that the emperor had rubbed the area between his brows a little more often, he did not think that there was anything wrong with it. After all, His Majesty had developed this habit since a few years ago. He had long forgotten when he had developed this habit. Yes, I do feel that the area between my brows is bloated. It's very uncomfortable. I feel muddle-headed all day, only wanting to sleep. However, when I really go to bed, I can't fall asleep. I keep feeling that the affairs of the nation are bothering me. It's better not to sleep. His Majesty was troubled as he continued to rub the area between his brows. It was as if the action of rubbing the space between his eyebrows had become an instinctive reaction that was not controlled by his brain. Yin Yang replied, I see. Your Majesty must have been overly worried about the affairs of the nation and overworked yourself. Adding these two factors together, it's inevitable that you'll suffer too much. However, Your Majesty's massage may not have any effect. This nephew has learned some relaxation techniques from a stranger. How about this nephew be bold enough to massage Your Majesty? As he spoke, he winked at old Marshal Qiu. Qiu Jianhan understood and said, It's rare for this child to have such filial piety. Your Majesty, why don't you let him try? This is probably a junior of your nephew's generation who can show some filial piety. How could the body of His Majesty the Emperor be touched by just anyone? Not to mention the head. If there was even the slightest mistake, then it would definitely be a monstrous disaster, a disaster that could wipe out the entire clan. It could be said that Qiu Jianhan was taking a huge risk by saying this. If Yin Yang really had second thoughts, not only would Yin Yang himself be implicated after today, he, the person who had spoken up to persuade him, would also be implicated. By then, his entire family would be executed without a doubt. Very well. His Majesty the Emperor put down his hand and closed his eyes tiredly, slumping down on the chair. Yin Yang walked to his back and extended his fingers, gently placing his left and right index fingers on both sides of His Majesty's temples. The endless divine art began to circulate quietly. Qiu Jianhan stood upright and leaned forward slightly, his eyes staring at Yin Yang's hand without blinking. If Yin Yang made any strange movements, the old marshal would definitely kill him without hesitation. Although he trusted Yin Yang 100%, he was still on tenterhooks. Yin Yang's endless divine art had only circulated one round in the Emperor's meridians before his expression grew increasingly grim. Looking at Yin Yang's expression, the old marshal's heart sank as well. When Yin Yang retracted his fingers, His Majesty the Emperor had already fallen into a deep slumber. Perhaps this was the only high-quality afternoon nap that the monarch of a country had had in the past few years. How is it? The old marshal asked anxiously. It's exactly as Ling Xiaozui said. Yin Yang sucked in a deep breath. His Majesty's current physical condition is already very bad. The main reason should be the consumption of one or a few strange poisons over the years. Otherwise, how could it have caused such a disorder in his meridians? His Majesty's cultivation base has progressed and his mystical qi hasn't been drained at all. It's all stored deep within his dantian. Perhaps this is the main reason why His Majesty doesn't think much of it. What he doesn't know is that although mystical qi can still flow through his meridians, they're already riddled with holes and broken into pieces. Such a situation is manifested in a state where even he himself won't notice it. However, once the poison accumulates to the point of eruption, or when he suddenly fights the enemy, his meridians will break inch by inch because they can't bear the burden. His body will then die immediately because his mystical qi has nowhere to vent. Yin Yang's voice was heavy. As for the discomfort between his brows, it's the only external manifestation of the poison. However, this manifestation also means that the poison is slowly invading His Majesty's brain, The old marshal's eyes widened as he listened. Is it that serious? Yin Yang sighed. The poison was invading the brain. Even though the old marshal was not versed in the art of poison, he was still frightened by what he heard. His Majesty's action of rubbing the area between his brows had started a few years ago. Just thinking about how far the poison had gone after such a long period of time sent chills down his spine. Can he still be saved? The old marshal's voice was trembling as he uttered these words. What we can do now is to do our best and leave it to fate. Yin Yang said, I've checked on His Majesty's internal condition just now. It's not optimistic at all. The 3 pills left by Ling Xiaozue, even if they're spiritual medicine, can only alleviate the poison temporarily. It's impossible to cure it completely. The old marshal's gaze was sorrowful. For a moment, he was speechless. He did not even have the time to feel anger. He could only feel an indescribable sorrow, fear, and heartache. Such a wise emperor who had worked so hard for the country and its people, the emperor of Yutang who had worked so hard for the country and its people, had been poisoned silently for years in his own palace. It was horrifying to think about it. The cultivation method I'm cultivating is different, it helps to expel the poison and recover. Yin Yang gritted his teeth. But I can't enter the palace often. If old Marshal can think of a way to send His Majesty to the residence of Yun or the residence of Marshal every half a month, I can come and help with the cleansing with my mystical qi. Together with the 3 spiritual medicines, there might still be a sliver of hope. Yun Yang's words were not meant to ease the old Marshal's heart. When he was inspecting His Majesty just now, Yin Yang had unexpectedly realized that his endless divine art was like a nemesis to the unknown poison. Wherever the endless divine art's energy was channeled to, the poison there would automatically avoid it. As for the parts that could not be avoided, they would be completely eliminated, just like pouring boiling soup on snow. However, no matter how miraculous the endless divine art was, the poison in His Majesty's body had already spread throughout his meridians. With only 1 or 2 cleansing sessions, even if Yun Yang's divine art cultivation base were to increase by another level, it would still be a drop in the bucket. It would not help the situation at all. Right now, he could only pin his hopes on more cleansing sessions and the vitality provided by Emmy. Only then would there be a sliver of hope to remove the poison. Old Marshal Chio's eyes shone. It's great that there's a way. Leave these matters to this old man. You just have to help with the treatment. Yin Yang said, Yin Yang is duty-bound to do this, but I still have to pay attention to His Majesty's meals and living environment in the future. Although I can't be sure if the poison that is harming His Majesty originates from the food or some common item, I can't let the unknown poison continue to harm His Majesty. Otherwise, there's no cure to speak of. Qiu Jinhan's eyes glinted coldly. This must be the conspiracy of the traitor. It must be eliminated as soon as possible. Yin Yang was shocked. This can't be done like this. Qiu Jinhan frowned, his expression fierce. Why? Are we going to let the traitor do as he pleases? Yin Yang chuckled bitterly. Capturing the culprit directly and asking him to hand over the antidote would solve the problem once and for all. However, this method is out of the question. It's something we can only hope for but not achieve. Why not? The old man's temper flared as he glared at Yin Yang. Think about it, old Marshal. The traitor can poison the palace and do it secretly for so many years without being discovered. What does this mean? What does it mean? Yin Yang said, this in itself is an extremely terrifying thing. Firstly, the person who can poison the palace must be an expert among experts. Secondly, there must be someone behind this. Thirdly, the country is in a crisis now. It can't withstand such turmoil. His Majesty's body can't withstand such turmoil as well. Yin Yang chuckled bitterly. I only have one question for old Marshal. If, and I'm only saying if, the mastermind behind this is His Highness the Crown Prince, what will old Marshal do? If Her Majesty is found to be the culprit, what will old Marshal do? Old Marshal Qiu was dumbstruck, obviously stunned by Yun Yang's bold speculation. "Old Marshal, do you know how many people around His Highness the Crown Prince is advising him? Do you know how many forces are involved in this? Do you know how large of an interest group it is that surrounds the Crown Prince? As for Her Majesty the Empress or the concubines in the palace, how large of an interest group do they have around them? What's more, if the expert who poisoned the palace is found and he's an unparalleled expert who is unrivaled, what should we do? Ling Xiaozui can enter and exit Yutong's palace so easily. Isn't it because of his profound cultivation base that he's unparalleled in the world?" Chapter 151. There will be 6 updates today. Please support me. All my sincerity is in the update, asking for monthly votes. Chapter 152. Old Marshal Chiu was silent for a moment before he suddenly heaved a long sigh towards the sky. The feeling of being powerless even though he seemed to have the strength to do so had almost caused this invincible marshal who had fought his entire life to break down instantly. It was true that he could not do it now. If this matter were to be exposed, the empire of Yutong would be torn apart immediately. Yun Yang's words were vague, but how could the old marshal, who was experienced in the ways of the world, not hear the underlying meaning? What did it mean to be able to poison the emperor in a place like the palace for so many years without anyone noticing? What did it mean? It was indeed terrifying to think about it. The old marshal sat aside in silence, his teeth chattering, hating the heavens for being blind and the earth for not having a handle. After a long, long time, His Majesty slowly woke up. His first instinct when he opened his eyes was to raise his hand to rub the space between his brows. However, he stopped abruptly as his eyes shone brightly. His eyes stared straight at Yun Yang, exuding an expression of extreme joy. "Yun Yang, your massage technique is amazing. I don't feel as uncomfortable anymore. Besides, I had a good sleep just now. I feel like my mind is much clearer. This is probably the best sleep I've had recently." Yun Yang smiled and said, "If your Majesty likes it, this nephew can nurse your Majesty's body at any time. It's my duty." "Ha." His Majesty laughed heartily and nodded. "I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you." The old marshal's expression was grim as he said, "Yun Yang, this has nothing to do with you now. This old man will have someone send you out of the palace. This old man still has something to discuss with His Majesty." Yun Yang knew that what the old marshal was about to discuss with His Majesty was a matter that could shake the nation. It was obviously inappropriate for him to sit here. Besides, it was also the old marshal's intention to protect him. He stood up immediately and said, "This nephew shall take his leave then. Farewell, Your Majesty." His Majesty looked at Yun Yang with admiration and said, "Very well. Come to the palace often when you're free in the future. I'm lonely sometimes." "Yes, Your Majesty." Yun Yang agreed. When he retreated to the door, he could not help but ask, "May I ask Your Majesty if the portrait behind Your Majesty is of Your Majesty when you were young? He's so handsome." The emperor abruptly closed his eyes and felt a piercing pain suddenly rise from his heart. His rosy face suddenly turned pale. Qiu Jianhan bellowed, "How dare you? Do you think the things in His Majesty's study are something you can simply ask about?" As he fumed, he shot Yun Yang a meaningful look. His Majesty closed his eyes, waved his hand, and said in a deep voice, "It's all right, it's all right. The person in the portrait is my..." His Majesty's voice was hoarse, but he did not continue. He said in a low voice, "Go, take care, Your Majesty," Yun Yang said with a lowered head. He retreated. Even when Yun Yang had left the palace, His Majesty was still standing in a daze, feeling waves of heartache. Just now, when Yun Yang left, he had told His Majesty to take care. It had sent waves of emotions through the emperor's heart. He could hear the sincerity in these words. However, it was this sincerity that immediately reminded His Majesty of his eldest son, Supreme Earth. When the latter was on his last mission, the latter had knelt before him and said, "Father, take care." The deep affection and attachment when he said those words. This child only looks like a person, but his mind is very simple. He's really not very sensible. Old Marshal Chiu coughed and said, "I'll teach him a good lesson when we get back." His Majesty waved his hand and stopped the old marshal's words, saying seriously, "Old Chiu, this is a good child." His Majesty's Adam's apple bobbed as he uttered word by word in a low voice, "Good child. Good child." These 3 words were what he had always wanted to say to his son who was Supreme Earth, but until his son's death, he had not been able to say it. But now, he was finally able to say these 3 words. At this moment, the bitterness and sorrow in His Majesty's heart had almost formed an ocean. My child is the best of the best. The person in the portrait is my. Although His Majesty did not finish his words, Yun Yang understood everything. He felt as if a bolt of lightning had struck his head. His gaze towards His Majesty had turned cordial as well. This was his eldest son's father. That was why he couldn't help but say, "Take care, Your Majesty." Even when he was on his way out of the palace, Yun Yang still felt dizzy. Just as Yun Yang stepped out of the palace, he saw a person standing in front of him. His scattered thoughts gathered abruptly. Young Master Yun is too kind. The person in front of him was someone he had met once before, Han Wufei from the Crown Prince's residence. Yun Yang glanced at him and frowned, saying faintly, "I remember your name. Han Wufei, the advisor of the Crown Prince's residence, am I right?" "What's the matter?" Han Wufei answered politely, "This lowly one is here on the Crown Prince's order to invite young Master Yun over for a chat." Yun Yang said, "I've never met His Highness the Crown Prince. Why is he looking for me?" Han Wufei was impatient when he heard him and said, "Of course His Highness the Crown Prince has something to discuss with young Master Yun." He did not have a good impression of Yun Yang to begin with. Now that he heard this fellow grumbling about the Crown Prince's invitation, he was infuriated. Yun Yang's gaze turned cold as he said coldly, "The Marquis of Heavenly Cloud's lineage has never been involved in politics. I myself am an idle man, a popinjay. What can His Highness the Crown Prince have to discuss with me? It's futile and useless. What's the point of meeting me?" Yun Yang had made his stance clear, making it clear that he did not want to be involved in the prince's fight for the throne. The Marquis of Heavenly Cloud's lineage was indeed superior, almost above all the other nobles. Logically speaking, Han Wufei should have given up and turned to leave. Han Wufei said faintly, "Young Master Yun's words are wrong. His Highness the Crown Prince is the monarch, we are his subjects. How can we not obey His Highness the Crown Prince's summons? Young Master Yun, please make the trip quickly and don't make a mistake." It was obvious that Han Wufei was determined to make Yun Yang meet the Crown Prince. It was also hinting that he would force Yun Yang to do so no matter the cost. Looking at Han Wufei's overbearing attitude, Yun Yang suddenly wore an eerie smile. Han Wufei was confused. Why was this fellow smiling? What was he smiling at? Then, he heard Yun Yang cry out abruptly. "What kind of logic is this? You're going to kill me if I don't go? Didn't I say that the Marquis of Heavenly Cloud's lineage doesn't involve itself in politics?" Yun Yang cried out in shock, his round eyes staring at Han Wufei in rage. "Is this a threat? Did His Highness the Crown Prince ask you to threaten me like this? You're going to kill me if I don't go? How can there be such logic in this world?" They were near the palace's entrance. While there were no idlers, there were plenty of high officials and officials coming and going. There were also hundreds of guards guarding the palace gate, both openly and covertly. Yin Yang's loud voice reached these people's ears instantly. In an instant, everyone turned around in shock, unable to believe what they had just heard. Politics? The Crown Prince was forcing the Marquis of Heavenly Cloud's lineage? Han Wufei was enraged, but he quickly lowered his voice and said irritably, "Yun Yang. What nonsense are you spouting? Hurry up and shut up." Yin Yang's voice grew louder. Why do you want me to shut up? Why do you want me to shut up? I'm the only son of the Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, the next Marquis of Heavenly Clouds. Can't I call for help when I meet a bad guy and am in danger? All of you are going to kill me and you're not even letting me speak. Can't all of you be reasonable? Is the Crown Prince's residence so overbearing? There was no lack of experts among the crowd. Han Wufei had purposely lowered his voice, so not many people had heard what he had said earlier. However, after Yun Yang's sudden shout, they had turned their attention to him immediately, listening to every single movement that had taken place. As for Han Wufei's last sentence, his voice was even softer, but there were already many who had noticed the commotion here. Naturally, many of them had heard him clearly as well. Don't spout nonsense. These people linked the conversation between the two of them and quickly came to a conclusion. They snorted inwardly, you've already threatened him so much and you're still asking him not to speak nonsense. What kind of logic is this to ask him to shut up? The aides of the Crown Prince's residence are indeed overbearing. The gazes from the crowd were like arrows that had been shot at him. Han Wufei looked flustered as he said angrily, nonsense. When did I threaten you? Yin Yang smirked. Why, are you angry now? Do you want to fight me? Han Wufei was enraged as he said loudly, speak clearly. When have I, Han Wufei, ever threatened you? This matter is detrimental to His Highness's reputation. I have to make it clear to you, no matter what. Yin Yang said, may I ask why His Highness is looking for me? For an idler, a popinjay like me? Han Wufei could not help feeling flustered as he looked at the people around him who had their ears perked up. How would I know why His Highness is looking for you? How can we, your subordinates, interfere with His Highness's matters and actions? I've just come out of the palace and His Highness is looking for me. What is it for? I've made my stand clear just now and I can let you report on your mission. Why must I go? Yin Yang asked again. His Highness has great foresight. What he wants to do is important. How can I speculate? The only thing I can do is to complete the task the Crown Prince has entrusted to me, not to report on my mission. Han Wufei snorted coldly. Does this mean that His Highness is looking for me to discuss important matters when I've just come out of the palace? If I hadn't entered the palace, His Highness wouldn't be looking for me to discuss important matters, am I right? Yin Yang continued to steer the topic of conversation towards a place that was miles away from the main topic. The topic was too sensitive. Han Wufei's mouth was parched as he mulled over his words. He was drenched in sweat as he tried his best to reply, His Highness only wants to invite young Master Yun over for a discussion. Even if young Master Yun didn't enter the palace, he would, Yun Yang, have been in Tiantang City for so many years. His Highness hasn't looked for me to discuss anything before, but now he's looking for me to discuss something once I've entered the palace. May I ask what is it about? Other than today's matter, what else does it have to do with an idler like me, a popinjay? Yin Yang refused to budge, keeping the words I entered the palace, I'm an idler, I'm a popinjay, at the edge of his mouth. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.